Welcome to a Civilized Discussion, the podcast that turns debate into a civilized discussion. I'm your host, Clinton Herigstad, and today our guest is Miss Preity Upala. She is a former investment banker turned multimedia entrepreneur and Hollywood producer. Global peace dominates the forefront of her life's purpose and is what drives her to connect people together through a series of spiritual endeavors and media productions. Her weekly spirituality radio show, The Eternal Hour, can be heard on iHeartRadio. She has been to over 75 countries and is currently developing a spirituality-focused international travel series. She is also working on a new book. She is an international public speaker and an astute political commentator who has participated in panels and spoken at various international platforms including the WEF, Women's Economic Forum, Horasis, University of Zurich, and Wellness 360 Dubai. She is also the political editor for The Observer, writing on geopolitics, conflict resolution, and religion and spirituality. Her passions in life include Sanatana Dharma, Vedic philosophy, and the science of consciousness. Preity lives in Los Angeles but travels all over the world for her work and spiritual pursuits. After I get into it a bit with Preity, we'll open the lines for you to call in and ask your questions or anything you might like to add to the conversation. So be formulating your questions as we go on, and when I say we'll be going to the phone shortly, start calling in to get into the queue. The number to call is 218-28-CIVIL or 218-282-4845. All right, and now let's get to the show.
Okay.
All right, and I'm live with my guest, Preity Upala. How are you doing today?
Namaste, everyone. Namaste, Clinton. How are you? And hello to all of your viewers. I'm so honored to be on your show.
Great. I'm doing very well, and I'm so happy that you decided to be on the show. And we just had that quick intro that the audience just listened to, so we're just going to go ahead and hop into the first question I ask everybody, which is, how did you get from where you were to where you are?
Wow. I mean, look, we all have magical journeys, and mine is no different. So I've got quite a diverse, colorful background. I'm Indian Portuguese, born in Dubai, grew up in Europe, and moved to Australia, and then finally came to New York and LA. And I speak 5 languages. I've traveled around the world. I've been to close to 100 countries. And I consider myself like a global citizen of the world. I have 2 degrees and used to work in the corporate field. I worked as an investment banker for a large investment bank, and then I worked as a management consultant, kind of consulting with people, clients all over the world. But all of that I found to be deeply unsatisfying and unfulfilling. And I just knew that it wasn't my life purpose. I knew that my dharma in life was supposed to be something a lot more purposeful, one where I can touch people and affect people at large. I just knew that I had more to me and, more that I could share with the world. So that sort of deep disdain and unfulfillment in my professional career actually led me to my spiritual journey and to find my own spirituality, so to speak. And this happened when I was quite young. So I'm a very, very fortunate person because I think I stumbled across a path that people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s stumble across, and some never even ever get to it in their lifetime. So I'm very lucky in my early 20s. I sort of was guided to look within and start kind of really speaking to my inner voice and hearing myself, listening to my heart as to what I wanted to do. And there was a particular incident that I always say kind of is such a symbol of what happened to me. I was on a train going for an interview with a big firm in Sydney, Australia, very excited, very pumped. And I remember when the train stopped and I was about to get off, the platform, this man, this gentleman just kind of stopped me and he looked at me and he said, "You have the face and the eyes of a true seeker. Have you ever meditated?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "Look, I just sense that you have a lot of questions and you need answers. And I feel that you need to go within because the answers that you seek are within you." And he gave me the name of some meditation center, which happened to actually be very close to where I was living at the time. So after my interview was done, I went back that day to that center in the afternoon, and that's when I had my first meditation. It was very emotional. I was crying. I was feeling all kinds of interesting sensations in my body. And I remember this facilitator she just kind of sat down next to me and said, "You need to start listening to your inner voice because it's trying to tell you something." And that's when I formally started meditating. I went to many different centers in Australia and then finally all around the world. And met great masters, was initiated by them, learned a lot of modalities. I read a lot. And my own sort of spiritual journey also got me to a point where I think my inner voice was very loud and clear. And all of this happened very quickly. And within several months of sort of meditating deeply, I realized that I'm supposed to be on the global stage. And I love entertainment. I love music and creativity and arts. And I realize that, you know what, I love performing arts and creative arts, and I feel like drama is maybe perhaps my modality. So I somehow very magically enrolled and was accepted into the best acting school in Australia, which is NIDA, and I was studying there full time for a year, working full time. I got myself a great agent, and I was actually quite successful very quickly, and that's when I got a call one day randomly from a film academy and from New York, and the lady was like, "Hey, I stumbled across your portfolio and I'm so enamored by you and who you are and everything. Have you ever considered Hollywood?" And I thought, "Oh my God, that's the ultimate dream for any actor." Uh, and she said, "Look, we are a film academy based in New York, and we'd like to formally invite you for an audition, and we're giving away scholarships for our program." And so I went to this audition, I did my audition, and I just didn't think about it. And for the next 2 months, I was off traveling. I went all over Southeast Asia. I was in Bali, I was living in Thailand for a few months and had a ball. And even on my trip, it's funny because I met a few uh, kind of psychics, I should say, one in Bali and one in Thailand. And these people just kind of randomly said, "Hey, you are going to be going to Hollywood soon. You're going to be going to America. There's a change in your life. Your life is not going to be the same as you've ever known it before. Just be very open and trust the journey." So I didn't really think anything about it. I came back and my dad told me, when you were away, we got a call from this academy in New York, and here's a number. I think you should call these guys. So I called up this number, and someone answered, and they said, "Wow, we've been trying to get a hold of you. Guess what? Congratulations, you won the scholarship, and you're going to be coming. You're going to New York. So that's what brought me to America, and I moved here several years ago for that course, and very soon I got my papers. I got my work visa, and eventually I got my residency and all that. But it's been quite a journey. And so I originally came to Hollywood for acting and movies, but I think my path has been very diverse, and it's led me to so many different areas. And now I am an international speaker. I have my own radio show. I'm a political editor and analyst for about 15 or 20 different outlets around the world. I am finishing up my first book. I'm also a brand ambassador for various brands around the world. And essentially, my platform is one of spiritual purpose and dharma, which is finding your gift in life. And everything I do has two aspects to it. One, it's global, and two, it's spiritual. And so I try to marry the things that I'm passionate about. And so that's my sort of journey in a nutshell. I live in LA. LA is just a base for me. I live in the Hollywood Hills area, but I travel around the world. I really love going to film festivals and big global think tanks. I mean, I speak for sort of Women's Economic Forum, the Women's Brain Summit in Switzerland, Harassus, which is a global think tank, um, the various spiritual summits in Dubai, and I have been invited to speak and have been awarded for some summits in India. Uh, so, and I look forward to so many more for the rest of this year as well as next year. I think it's only going to be onwards and upwards for me, and I just live such a fulfill life now because I'm doing all the things that I wanted to do. And when you're authentic and you're truly doing what you came here to be, I think the world opens up. The universe conspires to make all your dreams come true, and miracles happen. You live a magical life, and the bliss that you feel, you will not feel that anywhere else, I promise you, when you're not doing what you're meant to be doing. I think it's a different level of joy and contentment. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Well, that is exciting, and congratulations about all the success and that you've had in just realizing what you really want to be doing in the world. And I do kind of relate with that a bit myself. I do this podcast, but I also do other things like my voice acting and doing that type of work on my own terms, and it's been very liberating. And like you say, it just you end up living a different life completely once you start doing exactly what you want to do. So that's really exciting to hear. And just getting into the meat of our show here today, what is the essence of what you would like to get across to the audience?
In my role as a political editor and analyst, I focus on geopolitics, international affairs, sort of diplomacy, conflict resolution, counterterrorism, and also religion and philosophy. So these are all very connected. Actually, religion and politics are very much connected. Uh, so in my reporting and analysis, there's just a lot of interesting trends that have come up, and I just want to open up to your audience and anyone who's listening and sort of discuss some of the very, very crucial, important things, trends of our time. I think the world is very divisive, and I actually, even though there's so much white noise, I don't think we're having the essential conversations that we need to have. And I want to touch on uh, some of these. And also, living in the US, I think both of us and just any American citizen, we are in a kind of an interesting situation because America is affecting the world at large, sometimes by proxy. In fact, mostly by proxy. It's not actually involved, but it is because of its reach and power and influence. And it would be important for us as Americans or global citizens to sort of be mindful of what role our nations play, I think, in the global narrative. I want to touch on various geopolitical things that are happening around the world, especially, of course, with the US, there are so many, you have Iran, you have the Afghan war, and what's going to happen there. But also, part of my expertise with, counterterrorism and diplomacy and all that is particularly subcontinent issues. And of course, this issue of Kashmir is, I think, the hottest topic in the world right now, or it should be. And I want to talk about that in depth, I think, and what the conflict is, what its ramifications are, what's actually going on there, and also the role of Western media, which I think has been very disingenuous for various topics, including global elections and conflicts, and how it chooses to cover things is so unfair and very biased, I would say. So I want to talk about that. And also, my great passion, of course, is spirituality and philosophy. And I would love to talk about sort of the future of that and what's going on in that world, because I'm sort of so immersed in that, and I write and speak about those issues, they affect me personally. And I'm seeing a lot of trends, I think, especially with America in relation to spirituality, the good, bad, the ugly, all of that. So I think we're just going to have such an exciting, very diverse conversation today.
Well, that sounds exactly like the thing I'm into here on this show, and so we'll just get right into those questions, and starting off
Yeah.
with what is going on with the political dynamic in the U.S. and why is it so very divisive and toxic at the moment, in your opinion?
Well, it's funny because, our world, Earth, I guess, or humanity, right? We've been political for thousands of years, forever, because when you look at the old ancient civilizations, and the oldest is the Indus Valley civilization, that conservatively they say it's 5,000 years old. It's actually much older, possibly 7, 8, 10, or 12,000 years. And this is an unbroken, continuing civilization. I mean, those sort of stories and kingdoms, even they were divisive. They were, they had enemies, they had invaders, they had all sorts of various ideologies and so on. So I think forever, for millennia, we as a people have been divisive and very political. But I think with the advent of social media, suddenly in an instant, Joe Blow on the street can post his opinion out there on the global stage, so to speak, and anyone can see that and respond to it. And I almost like with the technological advancements, I think the barrier has been taken off as well, where now any normal person on the street can directly speak to the president of the United States, for example, with Twitter and stuff. It's beautiful in a way, but the problem is there's no filter, and anyone is saying anything. I think people have been thinking these thoughts forever. It's just that now they can hide behind an app, and they can hide behind the face of technology and sort of put some of their ideas out there, venomous or not, and people are responding to it and so on. And you can reach the world now. It's not just your neighborhood, right? I mean, you can be here sitting in LA and post tweets that someone in Sweden is responding to and sharing. I have quite a large social media base, and my, I guess, fans or followers or people who listen to me are really out there, from Finland to Germany to India to Maldives, Sri Lanka, Australia, New Zealand, you name it, and at different time zones and so on. And it's just wonderful to have this great conversation. But the problem is anybody is now putting out their views, and I think there's always been malice and hate. This is human. We're talking about human qualities. I don't think we're any less spiritual or less evolved now than before. It's just that now we have a platform to kind of openly say it, and we can say these things and sort of almost get away with it, unless someone trolls you, I guess. So it's interesting. So I think that's one thing for sure, social media. So the US, it's interesting that it has such a enormous influence in the world. It did have a part to play in the world wars, of course, in terms of fighting and all that, but not as much as some of the other countries. And even today, some of its influence is by proxy, and by its very sort of status in the world. I believe I wouldn't say it's the greatest nation on the planet, but certainly it's the most powerful one, not because of economy, because that will, there are other, like China and India are not far behind, and there will be a day when they do catch up. It's certainly not the largest country in the world, because again, in 3 years' time, India is going to be the most populous country, and it's also the largest secular democracy in the world. So by all accounts, in a way, India should be sort of the largest nation state on the planet in that way. But I think and also technology, you could say that innovation is America's greatest sort of gift to the world. The issue with that is, if you go to Silicon Valley, you're going to find people who are essentially from the subcontinent. Mostly, there's a lot of South Indians there who are developing all the apps. You also have a lot of Israelis, and you have Asians too, right? So very few kind of white Americans, so to speak. So even technology, which is sort of made in America, the brand, even that, to be honest, the people who are actually creating it, and 9 out of the 10 top tech companies in the world, their CEOs are Indians. It's not even Indian Americans. Google, Microsoft, you can go on, all of these great, uh, apps and companies. They're all Indians, they're straight from India. So you can't even say that technology is the great sort of export of America. It is a, a military prowess. I mean, militarily, they are the greatest. I mean, their spend is the largest, and the weapons that they have, they are, they can really defend themselves. They are very powerful in that way. It would be very few countries, I would say a handful, two or three in the world out of almost 200 can compete with the US on that level and could attack it. So that's why the attacks we've seen are either homegrown, internal, or subversive. Religious sort of warfare, which happens as a terrorist attack. It's not a conventional warfare that the US would hands down defeat any enemy. So if tomorrow Russia wanted to sort of attack the US, it wouldn't succeed. Nuclear weapon is a different issue, but then both countries would be engaged in that, which, there is that mutual armament, I guess, agreement now, where if one country has a nuclear attack on another, the other country has full rights to actually go ahead and retaliate, in which
Mutually assured
state both,
destruction. Yeah.
sorry, mutual control. Actually, you're right. They both get wiped out, which doesn't help anyone, right? So, but I really think America has, its powers lie in the military, and it's also it's very proud of that, and it's the spend, and now it's by so it has its also the bases. It has a million bases all around the world, right? So these make it geostrategically very, very powerful. So it may have a base for its own issue, but now it can interfere in another country's whatever. And we've seen it been done on so many levels. So I feel that some of the sort of kind of its geopolitical reach is happening in very obvious and some very subversive ways. Some, I mean, it's needed. I guess there are some war zones around the world that could do with some sort of peacekeeping, or just some military footprint out there. But for the large extent of it, the U.S. has no business being in these countries for inducing democracy, so to speak, because some of these regions don't have a history of democracy, and I don't, even if you did force democracy down their throats, it's not, it would never be a actual democracy. You would still, actually it would be worse, because now you'd have a terrorist group in the form of a party that is democratically elected, and that's almost worse in a way. It's worse than the Taliban in a way, because now they can democratically get elected, and you can't even say anything to that. And the West would have almost no say now, because hey, they're a democracy, right? And they had fair elections, and they're the citizens spoke, and they have chosen their leader. And we've seen this in Iran, and I mean, Pakistan is a great example of this too. It's definitely a democracy on paper, and yet you have their ISI, which is their military that's in charge of a country. And it's been happening like that for decades. So I think the US really needs to rethink some of its geopolitical strategies, because they have not worked.
And it does seem like a lot of the countries that they're involved in, they're involved in them not only just to spread democracy. That seems to be the surface explanation
Their
that's
talking
given.
point.
That's the talking point. Yes, democracy is what they're going to be spreading. But we've seen coups in places where there was an elected president. That, like in Venezuela, for instance. We are helping a coup start up there as well, and it seems like the democracy isn't so much what America is trying to spread, so much as defending and doing things to favor the special interests that the corporate oligarchy has their tentacles into, if to get a little on the tin hat
Descriptive.
side.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, look at Iran. It's a great example, right? I mean, look, firstly, I mean, is it Mesopotamia, the Persia? The ancient history has been around. It's one of the oldest civilizations in the world, and it's, they have a rich tradition and all that, and they had that for thousands of years, until they had their own Islamic invasion, I guess, come, and within decades, I think 30 or 40 years, that was completely wiped out, and they had a sort of Islam had spread to almost close to 100% now, and very few Jews and minorities left. But they did have their king, they had their Shah, who for maybe the West weren't fans of him, but the people were very happy, and Iran in the 70s were inc- it was incredibly modern. I mean, this was like the Paris of the Middle East in many ways, just like Lebanon. I mean, they were advanced. They were women were highly educated. They had all the rights, and they enjoyed such high human development, and very very advanced society on many levels. Economy was booming, and but they of course had a hand in toppling that and putting someone that they favored. And look at the state of Iran now,
Hmm.
and now Iran is the big enemy of the states. And it's funny that a country with zero nukes, how can that be such a big threat? I mean, of course, there's a lot of radical, Islamic support that to the Hezbollah, and I think it's more in that way. Of course, we have some serious issues with, I think, the Islamic state of Iran, of course, but you have to. There are other Islamic states that are far more dangerous, that fund the Wahhabi, regime even more than Iran ever has. So I think in that respect, the U.S. really needs to get its geopolitical, I think, narrative correct. I think what it views as its big enemy might not be the big enemy, and some of its other adversaries or nations that it deals with might actually be a bigger threat. So I'd like to see a foreign policy and a security office really have an honest conversation about how they have been in the last 50 years, all the mistakes that they've made, because they've made so many, and they've had some intelligence from other countries try to advise them in the right way, to go about things, or suggest, I think, what the truth might be out there, but they've chosen to just follow their narrative. And sometimes I wonder, it's one of two things: either they are that clueless that they don't know what is going on, especially with, like you look at the Afghan war, so to speak, especially in that region with relation to Afghanistan and the Taliban and all of that. You either must be that clueless that you're clueless, about what's going on, or you know exactly what's going on and you still want to go ahead because it's a money making a program for you, or you have some agenda of your own to push, and that's why you don't care about the facts on the ground. Because any person with common sense, the facts don't sort of add up. Like, why
Hmm.
are you continuing to do this when what you're doing is not working? 18 years on, right? Nothing has happened. They have not improved at all. They have not curbed any terrorism. I mean, now I'm so glad that President Trump didn't have that talk. I'm so happy. That's one of the smartest things he did, because I mean, you're gonna basically, you're trying to negotiate with the with your enemy, and you're going to surrender. This is ridiculous. After spending trillions, you're ending. This is how it's going to go down, right? You actually surrendered and you just backed off. That's how it was going to turn out, and I'm just so glad. And I'm happy to see people like Bolton leave, because he was pushing for
Hmm.
that. So that is very sane decision, I think, that this current government has taken. And I'd like to see some more sane decisions, I think, moving forward.
Well, that is a tall order to fill sometimes for the government.
Yeah.
And you did mention Kashmir. I'm
Yes.
personally not totally up to speed with that issue. So if you could maybe just like give us some highlights for the uninitiated of what is actually going on there.
Yeah, so it's funny that geopolitically, the U.S. is also now, well, I wouldn't say the U.S. as such, but certainly President Trump has kind of put his foot in his mouth, and he kind of stepped into a territory that he had no place to step in. So before I get to Kashmir, I just want to say recently at the G7 summit, there was a there was a meeting between Indian Prime Minister. And even before that, actually, they had a meeting even before the G7 where Modi, Prime Minister Modi of India, and Trump, of course, they have a great relationship, but they were having a talk, and Trump said something that I think made a lot of political analysts and diplomats all around the world just gasp because he said, "Oh, if you want me to mediate in Kashmir, I will do that. If you want me to mediate between you and Pakistan, I will do that." Oh my God, that is such a wrong statement to make. And I'm sure he made it. He was briefed, by the way, on what was about to happen in Kashmir uh, by the Indian government. But I think he misunderstood that briefing for, oh, I'm supposed to interfere in it. No, he was just supposed to just know about what was going on. That was, I think, the extent of it. And if need be, he could maybe, when he spoke to the Pakistani prime minister, he could say, hey, you need to stop with the terrorism, cross-border terrorism. That was the extent of what was required of him. But he misunderstood that as you want me to come in between the two countries, which he doesn't have because traditionally there has been agreement. There have been many agreements, but one of the important ones was, I think, in 1972, and this is UN backs this completely. But there's been the Shimla agreement between these two countries that anything to do with this topic of Kashmir will be taken care of bilaterally by India and Pakistan. No third party can interfere. They don't have the jurisprudence to do. He legally can't actually intervene. It's pointless. It's not legitimate, and it's not even wise because this is a very complex matter that these two countries can solve on their own. So when he said that, and the Indian Prime Minister had to kind of clarify that and say, and the Minister of External Affairs, Jai Shankar, had to be very clear in no uncertain terms that this is a matter that's bilateral between two countries. No third party interference or involvement will be entertained. And since then, he has backed off. And I think it's been nice to see Trump clarify that at the G summit. And he said he was, very, very kind and favorable to Modi, and they shared this, really warm exchange. And he just said, "Hey, India has got this. We'll back off," And also recently there was a huge rally in Houston 3 days ago. That was the largest, I guess, American rally on U.S. soil for a foreign leader. The Pope had, I think, 80,000 people. This particular one had over 50,000. And it was, by all accounts, the largest political, I guess, event for any foreign official in the world. So it was huge, and President Trump was there. He shared a stage with Prime Minister Modi, and they were 50 odd thousand Indian Americans, very proud to be both Indian and very proud to be Americans. They're model citizens, of course, because Indian Americans make up, even though they are 1% of the US population, they are the most educated and the most richest ethnic group of all groups, including white Americans. So that's a huge feat for a group that's barely 1%, 3 or 4 million, I think, barely. So it's a small group, but they donate to political causes and they support and fund candidates for elections and so on. So I think US lawmakers are realizing the power that Indian Americans hold. And Trump was there making sure that he wanted to tell them that he has their back and that they should support him in his future elections because he would be listening to their cause and so on. And he was very, very blatant about, the big threat that both the countries are facing are border issues, because even in India we have a lot of illegal immigration. We have about 10 million, no, I guess illegal aliens that have come through, and it's a very similar. They become a vote bank, for that border state. So illegal, I guess, alien or unlawful entry to the country is a big problem in India too. And the other is, of course, radical religious Islamic terrorism. And he called it out. He was very, blatant about it. I think Indians were happy to hear that, because some of the previous governments were not as vocal about it when we knew that there was a serious problem. He came out and he was very black and white about it. I think people appreciated that. And even on that stage, he said, Kashmir is an internal matter. We back India on its decision. So I'm happy to hear that. Now, moving to the issue of Kashmir. So it's very important. I'm firstly shocked that, number one, very little reporting has been done on it, kind of, relatively speaking. Now, this thing that happened on the 5th of August 2019, it was a law that was reversed by the Indian government. I would go as far as to say that it was one of the possibly the biggest political decision of the decade. Maybe you could say in the next 10-20 years, you could say, as far as terrorism and all goes, it could even be the biggest decision of the century, or so to speak, or so thus far. Because people don't realize that Kashmir is the most militarized zone on the planet. I know that people love to talk about Israel-Palestine conflict as this hotbed, and it is. I think it's a hotbed because you see a daily dose of sort of terrorism on a minor scale there, and it's two parties actively engaged in it, right? The Kashmir issue is very different. Number one, it's not a issue of disputed territory. It's not two parties who are at it. It's one party that for 73 years has sort of bombarded the other with terrorism. And legitimately and legally, the facts are on one side. It's not something that's a question mark, but so Israel-Palestine, just to give you an example, maybe you're talking about 20 or 30 million people when you count all of Israel or Palestine, not even, right? But you look at Kashmir, you have 1.5 billion almost in India, and is it 200 million in Pakistan, and then neighboring Afghan and all that. You're looking at 2 billion people that will be affected should there be some nuclear event that happened, or some serious conventional war that took place. Thankfully, I don't think that'll happen. But these are what's at stake, and I'm shocked to note that such little has been done, and whatever reporting has been done by the Western media, especially some of the stuff that has been coming out of the UK, I must say, they have been atrocious, I think, in covering this. Very one-sided, and not kind of choosing to forget the facts and neglect the facts, and painting a picture that's very wrong. It's been a very unfair reporting. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to kind of, being an Indian and being someone who's a political analyst and has done a lot of research and reporting on this very issue, to let people know, exactly what was going on, and what's happening right now in the future. So in 1947, when there was agreed that there was a partition of India and the British left, we got our independence from the British Empire. We had a lot of little political parties, but one of the political parties was also the All India Muslim League. Now, India, I think people don't even realize, is 85% Hindu, and in 1947 it was more than that. It was close to 90 or 95%. I don't know the exact number, but overwhelmingly it was Hindu with a few, minorities. Or it was Muslim. The number of Muslims it was a tiny number. I think 2% of the population at that time. So there was a leader of that group that wanted to become the first prime minister of India, but we had Nehru, who was Hindu. Funnily enough, happens to be from Kashmir. Also wanted to be the prime minister, and it was decided that Nehru was even Mahatma Gandhi was favored, towards Nehru. But this is a this narrative started forming from this All India Muslim League, which is really a political movement, not even an Islamic group, that in this country there will be no parity for Muslims. And they kind of growing this narrative that, what, we want our own state. We want our own Muslim state. So because India was going to be freed anyway from the British, it was agreed that this was a nice time if you wanted to have a partition, if you wanted to have a Muslim state separate from India, this would be the time to do it. And that's how Pakistan was formed. Essentially, it was a Muslim state, which was Pakistan, and a Hindu state, which was India. That was the agreement. Now, Hinduism is very secular, it's very open and tolerant, so by its very nature, it agreed to keep its minorities. So you don't just have to be Hindu to continue to live in India. You could be any other religion, including Muslim, and still happily live. They didn't boot out their minorities and other religions. But Pakistan was a theocracy. It was very clear. I think they ended up taking a very tiny amount of Hindus who were already living in those regions because they did a population exchange, but you can only go so far, and many continued remaining there. And today that population has dwindled to 2%, which is quite a worry. So this was a situation, and you sort of had this narrative, and that was how Pakistan was formed. So every princely state, there were about 500 states in India. They were all given this opportunity to, do you want to merge with India, or do you want to merge with Pakistan, or do you want to be independent? This was in 1947, right after independence. So right after August. You'll be surprised to know that not one of those 500 plus states wanted to go independent, which says a lot. And 545 odd agreed to go with India. I think it is very telling of what India was, the living conditions, what as a society, as a people, and it was going to be a democracy anyway. So 99% of all the states that were asked chose to go with India. There were a few, 4 or 5 states that Muslim majority, they decided to become what is Pakistan. And anyway, Kashmir was predominantly, it has been Hindu for over 5,000 years, but by design, several decades ago, it had they kind of changed the demographic of that region, and it was overwhelmingly Muslim majority. And Pakistan just assumed that Kashmir, being a Muslim majority state, would merge with Pakistan. So they had asked the leader of Kashmir at the time, Raja Hari Singh, do you want, you have to make a decision. Do you want to go with India or do you want to go with Pakistan? Now, the Raja was leaning towards India, but he just wanted a little bit more time to kind of think about it and come up with a decisive answer. But Pakistan couldn't wait, and when it realized that it wasn't jumping on the chance of merging with Pakistan, it feared that it might actually lose Kashmir, and that would be a slap in the face of their own narrative, because the very nature of their existence is that Muslim majority states should move with Pakistan. I mean, that's the whole premise of why they're formed, right? A home for the Indian Muslims. That's what Pakistan is. But when it realized that Kashmir was not going to merge with it, it sent some of its militants and some of the local tribal people and the Pakistani army to Kashmir, it essentially invaded Kashmir. And that's when this Raja of Kashmir, the leader of Kashmir, went to Indian government and said, "We need your help. We're being invaded." And in the Indian government, very smartly said, "We will help you. We'll send our army. We'll defeat this invaders. However, only after you sign." Merging. You have to, of course, promise that you're going to merge with India, or else why would we put our troops at risk? And there was an agreement. As soon as the agreement was signed, the troops were being sent. And so there was an instrument of accession which was signed on 26th of October, 1947. This is the official document which merges Kashmir with the Union of India. So with this statement and this document, Kashmir merged with India and it's as a part of India as any other Indian state. But for 73 years, for some reason, Pakistan has kind of internationalized and politicized this narrative that Kashmir belongs to Pakistan or that Kashmir wants to be independent and India is not letting it be independent. But the truth is far from this narrative, right? I mean, that document, the instrument of accession, and every diplomat in the world knows about this, that there was this accession that happened, so Pakistan has zero moral and legal claim on Kashmir, but I cannot believe that for 73 years it has sort of gone on and kind of spread this narrative. So anyway, the troops were sent, the Indian troops were sent, they defeated the Pakistani army, and they kind of pushed them back. As they didn't push them back all the way to what was technically Pakistan. There's a very small region that, because they were asked to retreat, and they should not have been asked to retreat. They should have gone all the way, pushed them out, and stake their claim, and that would have been the international border, and that would have been, we would have no problems today. But what happened is a very tiny part of Kashmir today is illegally occupied by Pakistan. It's called POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir, and that is illegally occupied Kashmir. And I think the UN and all these foreign entities know that, but they have not. They need to leave that land. And so that's one issue. So on August the 5th, in 2019, the Indian government made a very decisive and poignant political decision to reverse a article in the Indian Constitution. So right after this merging of Kashmir in 1947, they had appointed a chief minister called Sheikh Abdullah. This chief minister, he was Muslim, he introduced a very discriminatory kind of unfair article into the constitution. He said, "I want Kashmir to have its own flag, anthem, and its own constitution." And this was called Article 370. It gives Kashmir a special status. It was supposed to only be very temporary and transient, something that was like just upon merging, it was supposed to be introduced for a very short amount of time until people kind of settle down, and then it was supposed to be eliminated. And for 73 years, it was not eliminated. No government had the political will to kind of get rid of it. It was not a fair article because it cut Kashmir off from the rest of India. So even though Kashmir is part of India, it's an Indian state, this article kind of gives it autonomy in a way where you can't buy property if you're not Indian. The rest of you can't be a citizen of India from another state and buy property in Kashmir. You can't vote in their elections and so on. So it really isolated in a very, and Kashmir suffered. They got development money, but so many other things they didn't get, foreign investment they didn't get. And part of that Article 370 was another article which was very sexist, racist, and discriminatory to women, LGBT, people of other religions. And it's called Article 35A. and it was very briefly, it was an article where a Kashmiri woman, if she married a non-Kashmiri man, she would lose her property and inheritance and state rights. However, a Kashmiri man, he could marry some American lady, and that lady could suddenly gain property, inheritance, and state rights. So it actually discriminated against women. And because it's an Islamic state, there was factions of Sharia kind of. They didn't have to listen to Indian Constitution, which is uses a universal law, and Indian Constitution is secular. So, Kashmir had basically, it could have Sharia law, which it was having, and men were having four wives, and, there were all kinds of things that would not be allowed in India, but they were allowed in Kashmir because of this special status, and including LGBT, of course, is not recognized under Sharia law. The LGBT community in Kashmir was heavily marginalized. So on August the 5th, the Indian government reversed this. They got rid of 370. They said, we get rid of this transient law, which was up for removal anyway. We finally remove it, getting rid of the special status. So Kashmir is on every level, universally, it's a part of India, and we get rid of 35A, which now gives all women equal rights to the men, and it was, there's no religious discrimination going on, and Kashmir is part of India. People from the rest of India can now buy property in Kashmir, and they can live there and open businesses, foreign investment, and so on. So this happened, and suddenly it was so ugly because I was shocked to see that something that should be celebrated, that such a discriminatory article that was removed, was by the Western media, especially the BBC and the Guardian, and some of these kind of far left, leftist kind of outlets. They were painting this picture like India did something bad, like it was a big bully, and it is now disenfranchising and marginalizing Kashmir. It's so ridiculous when you look at the history of it. So there was so much false reporting, and they said that, oh, there's a blackout, and there's no communications going on. Kashmir is under assault, and so on. It's far from the truth. They've sent a lot of troops there because Kashmir is full of terrorists and separatists and militants and insurgencies, and to curb those people, they needed to be some police and law and order, and it was for that reason that they had sent the troops, and there is no official curfew, but people are choosing not to get out on the street or not to stay out because there's all these terrorist elements, jihadi elements out there. So, and Pakistan has made this a political issue. It has zero claim in what happens to Kashmir. And anyway, Kashmir is now an internal matter because after getting rid of this article, I don't know why it took this issue to the UN, and the UN just refuted it and said you have no say in what happens in another country, and Kashmir is not part of Pakistan. I'm sorry, but we are not going to intervene in the way that you're asking us to intervene. And human rights abuses, well, there have been human rights abuses in Pakistan for last 73 years, and there have been genocide and all that. So thankfully, no one has listened to it except some of these kind of far left factions. And I'm sorry to say that the Labour Party in the UK, sadly, they've kind of taken this cause on. And some DNC far left elements have kind of, without understanding and without appreciating the history of Kashmir and how bad this article was for India and for the people of Kashmir, they are kind of taking the side that Indian government has done something bad because I think they're over shielding of Islam in a way and sort of overcompensating for that. They're immediately calling out on India for something that it has full right to do for its own people, and also it was something good that was done. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to share with your audience of a little bit of the history and what this article is, because the world is like, what exactly happened in Kashmir? They're clueless, but they're quick to comment on it. So I just wanted to let you know about that.
And what was the spin that you noticed that you didn't agree with? What were they actually saying that that didn't jive with what you had experienced or knew about the situation?
Very, very good question. Thank you for asking me that. Several points. Number one, they were trying to paint a picture that this was done by brute force, that this was basically, it was a case of the prime minister waking up one morning and saying, yep, we're going to scrap Article 370. It's a throw out a presidential order. It's done. The article is scrapped and there's no special status. That's not what happened. This bill, it was a bill, it was passed in parliament, it was passed, it was introduced, it was opened in the parliament, both upper. So India is a true democracy. When we have elections and when we have bills, they are very fair, and people have a fair say. There have been so many bills that would have been right for the country that didn't get passed, and the government didn't intervene because it really is a democracy. So this was a law that was passed in upper and lower house of the Indian Parliament. There was a big vote, two-thirds majority. It won with a two-thirds majority. That is enormous. I don't think you have too many bills, small bills, that pass with two-thirds majority, which proves that this was something that India and Indian people as a country for 73 years didn't like, because it was unfair, it was very kind of sexist, racist, and discriminatory in many ways, and it had turned Kashmir into an apartheid state in a way, because essentially it was saying Kashmir can rule itself and every other state can't. And because Kashmir could rule itself, you had a horrible dynasty, you had two dynasty parties. So for 70 years, it was basically two families that just exchanged power. These were corrupt parties. They were very wealthy. Both of them were Islamic, Muslim leaders who, they were soft separatists. I mean, they didn't say it out in public, but they really had their hopes for a independent Kashmir, which is not even an option, considering it merged with India. So where are you going to go with that? So one was the false narrative was saying that the Indian government kind of pushed or forced this. It didn't. It was passed with two-thirds majority. Most parties, most MPs and sort of constituencies voted overwhelming for it. I think it was something that was celebrated by women around the world. It was, I mean, women in India. It was celebrated by LGBT community in India. It was celebrated by minorities in India because, hey, it's fair game now. Everyone gets equal rights now. So that was one issue. There was misreporting about that. And the second is the point about, it's under lockdown. It's not under lockdown. There is no official curfew. There is no official lockdown. People are choosing not to get out. They're scared that if they're going to go to shops and stuff, they're going to be shot by terrorists. And it's ironic that, and also the some of the outlets, especially BBC and Guardian, I think they've been the worst. They've been saying, oh, there's a human, there's human rights violation in Kashmir. And it's ironic because in the last 30 days, I think there have been two fatalities. Two people have been killed, and even those two have been killed by Pakistani terrorists. None of them have been killed by the armed forces. So they're painting a narrative that the armed forces of India are, they're everywhere, and they're killing innocent people and locking people up, rounding people up. Not true. And then there was also some of these, even BBC had done this. They used footage from several years ago saying that it's happening today in Kashmir, because we could tell why some of the flags, the sayings on the flags, because that was footage that happened when some terrorist was killed in Kashmir, and the separatists were rioting. They were outraged that a terrorist had been killed. It should be something to be celebrated, but that footage of that riot was circulated on these outlets, and a lot of Indian people called them out on it. They even, I think there needs to be a lawsuit, I feel, because this is defamation and you're painting a very wrong picture of India, and you're sort of painting a very wrong picture of what is going on there. The reality was that it kind of had become a little ISIS enclave over the past 30 years, where you had, terrorists and separatists who were running for office, and outright they had blatant terrorist the talk. What they were saying was really venomous stuff, and should not be tolerated by any free society, and burning Indian flags, and this goes beyond sedition. But because of that special status, they couldn't be tried, they couldn't be kind of arrested, you know. So these were some of the things that were falsely reported, and it's very sad to see, like in the UK, you get this Labour Party that is so misguided on this issue, that they're coming out and sort of kind of voicing this Pakistani false narrative that is baseless. It has no legs to stand on. And funnily enough, they are very violent and aggressive and very oppressive, because on the Independence Day, which was August 15th, in the Indian High Commission, I think in London, there was a big mob of Pakistani and sort of Sikh separatist goons that had come out of this Indian Commission. People were, there were people who were celebrating the independence. There were peaceful Indians there, but this big mob of, I don't know, I think it was close to 1,000 maybe. They came there, they were aggressive, they were ruly, they were rude. Towards the end of it, they were throwing eggs, they were throwing tomatoes, they were throwing iced water bottles at women, children, and elders. Shameful, shameful. And they even assaulted the London police force, who were there to protect innocent civilians. So I mean, in 73 years, they have learned nothing. They have no decency, they have no class. They just continue to harp on an issue that's not even theirs. And basically, they claim that Kashmir is theirs, which is not. Then they claim that Kashmir ought to be independent, which it's not an option. And then they bring up this UN Security Council resolution of 1948, I believe, which is baseless. Because basically there is a UN resolution that they always quote, which they have never read. Not one Pakistani journalist has ever read it, because if they had taken the 5 minutes it takes to read it, they would shut up forever, because this resolution is very clear. It states that if you want a plebiscite in Kashmir, a plebiscite is basically, do you want an independent vote? If you want to ask the people of Kashmir, do they want to be independent? Three things need to happen. Number one, Pakistan needs to withdraw completely from Kashmir, because they illegally occupy territories. It needs to withdraw completely. Number two, India needs to reduce some of their, not withdraw, but just reduce some of their forces. And then number three is, you need to have, ask the people of Kashmir, do you want to go with India or Pakistan? There is no third option. There is no independent Kashmir option. This is the UN resolution. It's very clear. It's 3 steps and they're sequential. So the second can't be done unless the first is done. So the very first step of this resolution is Pakistan needs to withdraw from India completely, needs to withdraw from Kashmir completely, which it hasn't for 73 years. So when these people go on about even recently, even at the current UN, the United Nations General Assembly meeting is going on right now, and Trump had a meeting with Imran Khan, who is the Pakistani Prime Minister, and there were some bunch of journalists. I mean, I saw a video clip of this and I started laughing, because there were like 2 of these journalists were asking Trump, oh, what do you think of these UN resolutions? I mean, what's going on in Kashmir? What do you think about the outrageous stuff that's going on in Kashmir? And he was Trump was laughing. He was joking. He's like, are these your people? Are they part of your team? Where do you get these people? And I started bawling. I was like, he's absolutely right. I mean, these are like come on, guys, like take the time to read the resolutions and ask some sensible questions that one can give an answer to. But the UN has refuted it. I think just as a global, internationally, they have been backed in a corner. Nobody takes their cause. No one agrees with them on this issue of Kashmir. I think the world overwhelmingly backs India on its decision. It's an internal matter. It can do what it likes. So I just wanted to share some of the false reporting that has been coming. It's stopped now because I think they realize that also there's been a lot of outrage, people writing in and saying this is false, and there's been a lot of, I think, counter reporting to that. So I think they kind of stopped that that narrative that they thought it would catch on. It didn't. It actually kind of, New York Times is the worst with this, and Washington Post are really, really atrocious. And you see them spinning stories on all kinds of narratives, and I think their own credibility is gone down the toilet, especially after this. Like, I don't think any Indian or subcontinent person will ever read the New York Times because of such fake news that they kind of spread with relation to specific issues.
And that is a lot of information for sure. And I'm sure there's some people that might have questions about what you just said. So if anybody watching would like to call in and ask any questions directly to Preity, the number to call in is 218-28-CIVIL. That's 218-28-CIVIL or 218-282-4845. And do you think that the left spin on that Kashmir issue, do you think it has something to do with like what do you think the motive behind it is? Maybe the defense of the Muslim community that they tend to go toward? Is that kind of what you think it is?
Yeah, that's a very good point to bring up. Thank you for sort of noting that. That is definitely an overcompensation in that, because on this narrative of, I think the right, this is fodder for the right. They can just pull the left out, tear it apart, when it can quote things like this and say, it overcompensates with this, and sometimes it really gets things wrong, because in this oppression Olympics, because that's a term that the right uses to kind of degrade the left. When it says, oh, this left is far leftist agenda of the DNC is this oppression Olympics where some minorities are more oppressed than others. This is actually true. They deem some groups to be more oppressed than others, and that's just their kind of delusional thinking. I don't think that's the case at all if you look at it politically, what's going on. But they do kind of shield it, and you have a situation also where in the Labour Party, for example, in the UK, there is an overwhelming number of MPs, lawmakers that are like Pakistani born, Muslim origin. So even in the DNC, you have a situation where, even Bernie Sanders, I mean, I like a lot of his policies, and, he's been a champion for the people for so long, but I think one grave mistake, I do have one, this is a big fault of his, just with this issue. He did something that he shouldn't have, because his assistant campaign manager, I believe, is someone who's Pakistani. So clearly, Bernie isn't fully, equipped. I mean, knowledgeable on history of India or Kashmir. I mean, he's not Indian. He's, he wouldn't and he shouldn't know about it. But I think he's been fed narratives that are not true by his own campaign manager and people close to him, and he addressed some big meeting recently of, I believe it was 6,000, Muslim Americans, and these people, again, they're not knowledgeable on the issue, but they can become very hostile sometimes. They vote as a bloc, and they claim to be very kind of oppressed and all that, but you see their act like, people like Linda Sarsour and all that. I mean, I don't know what your views are on her, but I mean, she can be so she plays the victim, I believe, but I mean, she's very assertive in a lot of ways, kind of very aggressive, and you look at Indians or you look at Hindus as a people, they're very passive. They're not very good at defending themselves. They're not aggressive. They're not terrorizing. In fact, they become a soft target for terrorists
Hmm.
and for invaders. That's why India as a nation was invaded so easily because they just welcomed everybody, and they're all this kind of dharmic notion of true secularism where they actually respect all faiths. However, a lot of other faiths don't respect them, or they don't give them the respect, mutual respect that they deserve. So we have a situation where Bernie Sanders addressed this group of American Muslims, and he was saying things like Indian government, I don't like its actions in Kashmir, not knowing some of the history that I shared of what what happened, what is going on, how this is a good thing, how it removed Kashmir's status as an apartheid state rather than turned it into one. So that was not cool, and I think there was a lot of pushback. Indian Americans, it's a tiny group, but they're the most educated and wealthiest, and they do have a lot of influence. They've traditionally voted Democrat overwhelmingly, and sometimes I wonder, this kind of DNC policies, a lot of them have not favored them, and they continue to do it because they want to be known as, because India is traditionally very liberal, very open, tolerant society, so they feel that they relate more to democratic
Hmm.
principles. But I think there's a lot of subversive elements with the DNC that they need to really wake up and look at and smell the coffee, because I think this is not okay what Bernie did, and he is facing pushback. I think a lot of Indian Americans are very turned off by some of the things that he said. Also, they're not. It's not accurate. It's not, without knowing what's going on there. He made flippant remarks.
Hmm.
So that's, I think, it's also who they're listening to. Some of these people, they need to speak to actual historians, or speak to your counterparts in India who are knowledgeable in this, and not the people who you normally speak to, because they're parroting something that I can see through it. It's very blatantly inaccurate.
And and I wouldn't necessarily categorize the DNC as far left. I personally consider them very centrist, and
Yep.
just kind of the other side of the political establishment. There's the two sides of the political establishment, in my opinion, and they're just the more liberal side of it, just to
Yes.
appease the masses as far as having a liberal option. But as far as the gaffe that Bernie made there, I did hear about that, and it does make sense that if his one of his peoples from Pakistan, they may have a skewed opinion on that, and also Bernie himself is a champion of civil rights, and he may have misinterpreted that as
Yes.
a civil rights thing, and that's not the only gaffe I've heard of Bernie recently, where he also
Yeah.
continues to kind of push the narrative of Russian interference in the previous election, which has been
Yes.
kind of thrown out the
That's been
window.
refuted. I think
Um,
Russiagate, I mean, I must say, I mean, we both agree, and I think I mean, even a lot of Democrats have refuted Russiagate, right? And
mhm.
also some of the stuff that, okay, as Israel Palestine, that's a very touchy topic, especially for Americans. But I mean, there is a lot of terrorism both ways. You have to call out on Hamas as well. You have
Mhm.
to call out on human shields. You have to also call out on the violent ideology and terrorism that comes, from the other side. You can't just make one party the big bully here, which I've some factions of the DNC, I feel that I hear that from them, and I think it's very dangerous to do that. I think you should do your
Mhm.
historical research and know, again, similar to Kashmir, because that Israel Palestine issue also has a history. There is also fact there, and I mean, there's a lot more to it that meets the eye rather than just saying, hey, we need to. boycott this or that. There's more to it. I think you need to call out on terrorism on both sides, you know.
And I think that does speak to the job of the presidency. That it's kind of a ridiculous scenario where you put one person in
Yes.
charge of 300 million people, and he's supposed to,
Yes.
or he or she is supposed to know and be involved and be knowledgeable and have a coherent opinion on everything. So I
Yeah.
think that could be, as far as all of the gaffes that any of the presidential candidates make, if those are
Yes.
the worst that Bernie has made, I still think that that's probably the least that I would have to worry about in as far as choosing a presidential candidate, because there is definitely the heart of what that
Yes.
movement is about. Does seem to
Yeah.
be genuinely for the people, for civil rights. If Bernie had known more context about the situation, I think, I'm basically basing my opinion currently off of what I'm hearing from you too. So we're all only aware of what we are aware of. So there's that
Yeah.
aspect to it. And I do have a comment from a listener that did say Bernie's problem, and he'd even admit it, is that he has to
Yeah.
live in sound bites for attention. So I do agree with that, because our political system has become show business. It's a reality show.
No, I agree with you that if that's the worst gaffe, it's not that bad. However, I think it exposes a greater something more malicious that's happening, where you have people who are trying to not look at the facts I mean, this issue of this Kashmir thing, it's a non it's there's no issue of a dispute, as in you can't, it's very black and white in many ways. I mean, yeah, there it's messy, but in terms of legal merging and official documents and legitimacy and claims, legal claims, and so on, it's very black and white. And the UN or any foreign entity will overwhelmingly say one is correct and the other is wrong. So you can't. I mean, he needs to be. Also, I think it's a bit pandering to a big, because I think the Muslim sort of American vote, they vote as a bloc, and they have become I think the left or the DNC, it looks upon them as a vote bank, and it's not good to do that, because then you will pander to them and you will say and do things that are not correct. Like in this case, it's not not only was it not accurate, but it was also very, at me as an Indian and as a someone who knows about what happened, it's very reckless, and it's not okay.
Right.
I
Yes. Yeah.
mean,
And I
yeah,
do agree with you in that case, that the
yeah,
context should be there before you make
yes,
a statement.
a sensitive issue, very sensitive issue. Yeah,
Yes. And as far as the nationhood of Kashmir and Pakistan and all these areas,
yeah,
it does seem that there is that animosity between them, and that kind of speaks to the rise of nationalism, or that the nationalism has always been there, and the rise of populism around the world. And do you think, or why do you think nationalism has become a dirty word? What are your
yeah.
feelings
I
about
do.
nationalism?
I do think it's become a dirty word, but just to touch on one thing you said, why is there so much animosity between the India and Pakistan? It's a great question, fantastic question. I would disagree with the question itself. I don't think that the animosity or the venom is it. I don't think it stems from two parties towards each other. I think we have a situation where in 1947 there was a separation where India kind of broke into a Muslim majority state called Pakistan and a Hindu state called India, which is secular and democratic. And India moved on from 1947, right? It moved on from that separation, looked ahead to the future, and today it's the third largest economy in terms of PPP. It's the I guess, I mean, it's a world leader in terms of so many things. The its space program is arguably the second best in the world after NASA. And its export to the world is, guess what? Spirituality and yoga. And it's a country, it's the only large nation in the world, I think, that in its entirety has never invaded any other country. It has never actually waged a war or attacked or invaded any country in its eight, 8,000 year history. Even back in the day, it has always been attacked, invaded, colonized, occupied, and of course it had to fight them, but it never instigated anything. So that's the nature of India, and predominantly a kind of a dharmic, kind of Hindu framework. But then you have a situation on the other side that since 1947, I think they have no real identity, because their identity really is what they're not. Their identity is, we're not India, we're not Hindu, and but what is the Pakistani identity? Its export to the world is cross-border terrorism, nuclear programs, and training, and uh, giving and coddling terrorists. I mean, don't forget the 9/11 hijackers were trained there. Osama bin Laden was given refuge in Pakistan. And I think what bugs me with U.S. foreign policy is, and they know all of this. This is when I bring up the same question of they're either clueless or they know what's going on, but they still choose to go ahead with this, because they have been giving billions of dollars in aid to Pakistan forever. These billions never go into development. It is a highly rural, underdeveloped country with, it's the So General Mattis recently came out with an explosive report and statement uh, just a few weeks ago, saying that it is the most dangerous country in the world. I Some people say Iran is. I actually disagree. I think with Iran, it doesn't have nukes, and it doesn't have this direct connection to 9/11. I mean, if 9/11 was your greatest catastrophe, terrorist attack on your soil, you'd have to look at what elements were a part of it. And so the billions go towards their nuke program, and also towards their army, their military. They have 45,000. This is their own prime minister telling Trump, this was on record. He said, I think we have 45,000 open terrorists in our country, in Pakistan. That's how many he chose to disclose. I mean, I can only imagine how many thousands he didn't want to mention. I'm sure it's a lot more than 45,000 if that's what he's willing to concede. And they have terror training camps. They have ISIS, Al Qaeda terror training camps. So when India deals with Pakistan, and part of this beauty of this thing, what happened in Kashmir was, when you remove this autonomy, because Kashmir was very kind of, it had this strong link. The separatists in Kashmir had this connection with the terrorists in Pakistan, and the Pakistan ISI and the army, and there was funding, there was indoctrination, all of that stuff. Arms, they were smuggling terrorists into Kashmir and all that jazz. So when you sort of get rid of the special status, you almost cut off that feeding hand. So it's better for curbing terrorism in a way. I think that's the biggest victor in this recent Kashmir, the change, removal of 370, is, I think, world peace wins, because just the terrorists, their reach has been reduced a little bit. So that was the question about the animosity is not both ways. It's one party just constantly bombarding the other with hate, venom, and the official motto is a very famous term. It's called "bleeding India by a thousand cuts." That's their official motto. So that's that, they run that. So as a nation, that's who they are, and sadly, it kind of seeps in. So you meet Pakistanis in America or the UK or whatever. Sadly, a lot of them still I think they've been taught that in schools, and hate the Hindu, hate India, and we are not taught that. We're actually, it's the opposite. Our textbooks are so subversive. We're taught to romanticize about our colonizers. It's so perverse. It's not funny. That's another issue, though. But with them, they have this kind of venom inside that, and India is become a force for good in the world, and look at its economy and everything. And then you have a situation like Pakistan that, is does and in I think in 9 months' time it's going to be a bankrupt state because they've run out of their funding and they have IMF funding and so on, and they're going to be blacklisted maybe if their terrorism continues. So there's a lot going on. So I think if you're going to take sides in this Kashmir narrative, or you're going to take sides about India and Pakistan, I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist. So someone like Bernie, I think be should be a little bit more educated, and when the facts are staring at you, when Indian Americans are they they're model citizens in America. They never get involved in terrorism. You never hear about them, locked up, doing anything wrong, drugs, nothing. They work hard, they pay their taxes. They are the doctors and the PhDs and the professors, and just stay out of people's way and are very respectful of Christians and other religions. And we are not natural activists, or we're not aggressive or assertive about our faith or tradition or anything. So I think I'd like to see the far left or the progressives even, I think, educate themselves a little bit more about this, because I think on this one issue, there are a few others, but they don't come out good. You're not, you don't. I don't think their narrative is to a sane, sound person. It's a bit off,
And I know that the media does tend to spin things a certain way, and that just generally depends on which outlet you're looking at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
So it does make sense that we may not be getting all of the accurate information, and that it's going through these filters that have certain agendas, and and that again speaks to the false dichotomy that we have in America, where there's these two parties that are kind of two parts of the same establishment, in my opinion. And when I see the government doing something that doesn't make sense, I genuinely don't go to they must be clueless. I go to there's some greasy aspect of this that we don't quite understand yet, but there's some other thing going on here, and that could be any number of things on the global stage. But and it does seem like you have talked quite a bit about the DNC. What do you think are a lot of the fault lines with the DNC, and do you think it's falling apart as well?
Yeah, you're absolutely right when you mentioned, the establishment occurs on both levels. It's not just Republican. I mean, the corporate establishment is also very, very much with the DNC too. Some of the fault lines is, I think they need to things like this, especially I think with the whole, I think you can't overcompensate with one kind of oppressed minority group and not the others. You can't do that. I think there's been a history of that with the left. For some reason, they just feel, and this goes back to this sort of old communist Marxist philosophy of, oppress people together. And when you look at someone who's powerful and wealthy and doing well, but, they're still maybe a small group, you don't see them as a victim, So, for example, Islamophobia is a huge thing in the world, and it's been hijacked as well. And now any criticism, any legitimate, well-informed, honest, accurate, needed criticism of various dangerous, barbaric ideologies of Islam are deemed as Islamophobic, when that's not what it is at all. You have to have a conversation about dangerous, violent tendencies in any faith. These tendencies have existed across the board, right? I think there's violence that has come from organized religion for millennia, but some of them had reforms and so on. And I think when you look at the global landscape of terrorism, it's coming from one place more than another. And I think you need to really take an honest look. I think they need to just educate themselves more, and of course be for the people. No one should uh, you can't hold a group responsible,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to be very clear about what's going on, because I think there are people hijacking this, and in the name of Islamophobia, they are kind of shutting down very necessary conversations that
Mm-hmm.
need to happen if you want global peace. I mean, mutual respect is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
You have to respect other faiths. And when we get into religion, I'll talk a bit more about this, because this is a really dangerous facet, of some organized religions, where they don't seem to have mutual respect for another to practice whatever faith they desire. It's not about you're
Mm-hmm.
right and the other person is wrong. So they are, and tribalism is happening. I'm noticing that a lot. Also, I think there is a thin line about, you know, look, immigration again has become a dirty word. Immigration is, I'm an immigrant. Anyone who came into this country, uh, I guess lawfully, is an immigrant. People who unlawfully enter the country, they're not immigrants in that way. I mean, if they've lived here for a long time and they've been good citizens and good people, of course they can apply for that. And the U.S. has some steps for that. But I think firstly, there's no such thing as illegal immigrants. That word is a non entity. If you're an immigrant, you're not illegal. And if you're illegal, then you're not really an immigrant. So you have to,
Mm-hmm.
it's illegal aliens or undocumented aliens or unlawful, people who came in. So I think, and immigration and diversity is one thing. That's a beautiful thing. That is a beautiful thing for the world at large, right? We are richer because of incredible cultures infused, and makes you stronger. And like the testament to that is when you have a situation where the richest ethnic group in the greatest country in the world happens to be Indian. They're not white. They're a minority. They're a religious minority. It's a tiny group, but that's diversity for you. That's
Mm-hmm.
immigration that has gone right. It's like a success story, and that you see that across the world. It richens our society and culture. That's a beautiful thing. But I think with the DNC, when you have a situation where you got vets dying on the streets because they have no health insurance and health care, and yet you want to give voting rights maybe to people. By the way, not I'm not talking about across the border. It could be an Australian white person that overstayed his visa, because we have a ton of those as well. So illegal aliens are not we are not talking about border related. It's anyone who has outstayed their visa. They would also be an illegal alien, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. So they shouldn't have voting rights, or all the other things that the DNC. It's become like a free for all. And I think you need to be a little fiscally more conservative, especially when the economy ain't doing that well these days.
Mm-hmm. And so that goes kind of back to the question of nationalism. Where do you stand on
Yes.
nationalism?
It's funny. You're right. It has become a dirty word. It shouldn't. Look, Mahatma Gandhi, he was an Indian nationalist. Nelson Mandela, he was a South African nationalist. All of these great leaders were nationalists. They cared about the country. I mean, clearly, even you can't love Mahatma Gandhi and everything that he stood for, and then not like his concepts of sovereignty, nationhood. Even he was someone who was very clear about borders, and he was for the partition and all of that stuff that went down. So it's, I think, very healthy to be proud. I think to be a patriot. Well, I'm actually. It's in my own case. It's interesting because I'm Indian, but I'm an Australian citizen. But I'm a resident here, and I feel proud to be an Indian. I feel proud to be an Aussie, and I feel proud to be an American. I mean, feel proud to live here and call America my home. So I don't think there's anything wrong with any of these stances. You can't uh, conflate nationalism with far right wing ideologies. and bigotry. I think they're two very different things. Because, for example, in India, we don't have a right wing. We only have an anti-left because the policies of so-called right-wing government in India would put progressive social democratic parties in the West to shame. Their public schemes and public uh, free healthcare, free education, free everything, uh, rights that they have it's enormous. It's almost like this is like it's become a it actually was a welfare state for a long time. They were running on this Soviet Union uh, kind of socialist slash not communist in that way, but very much a socialist model that it worked in some way, but it didn't work because they closed off themselves to foreign investment and economic reforms and industrialization. So once we opened that up, combined with true democracy, we soared. So that was a good thing. So, I think you can't conflate nationalism with far right wing or racist tendencies. I think this is what's happening in the world. You may not like Brexit, but you have to respect people's votes, and you can't say that. They were, for example, they have been African people in the UK that voted Brexit. Because they thought, hey, we want to protect. I'm a proud Brit. I want to protect my country, and we want to get out of this EU, which they thought was maybe in their eyes the EU is a failed European experiment, right? So you can't turn around and call that person a bigot and a racist. He's African, for God's sake. So I think this quick tendency from some people to jump and label people just because they don't like the way that they vote or the way their ideologies. There's an incredible number of intolerance, I think, that comes across the board, but I'm seeing it now on the left in a way that I didn't see it before.
Excuse my
That's
coughing.
Very problematic.
I'm just getting over a cold here, so I'm coughing.
I'm glad my cold is all. I don't hear it in my voice, so that's good. So I think nationalism is good. I'm a global citizen of the world. I think globalization through technology is great, and spirituality is a great thing too. I think you need to honor your nation's sovereignty, and unless you have strong borders, you have no nation. Even spiritual leaders have said this. Even anyone who is a lot of thought leaders have said this. So it's not a dirty word. I think some people have made it a dirty word on both ends of the spectrum. So you need to separate being proud of your nation and the patriotism that you feel. You need to separate conflating that from, oh, you're a bigot or a racist. And also the same goes the other way. Just because you criticize the government doesn't mean you're a sellout, because we're seeing that as well in some of these countries that have sort of a quote right government. There's no space for dissidents. Being critical of government is very important. Having an active opposition is very important. The only thing is, it's a thin line between dissent and sedition. And in some places you do see it. I don't think it's the case with America so much. You're not seeing people burning U.S. flags yet. I think if things go ahead in some of the ways that they're happening, because in some other countries you do see a situation where people are burning their own flags, and that's not good. I think that is sedition, and you can't do that. If you're that embarrassed and ashamed of being a citizen of a particular country, you know what? There's the door. I think you're free to leave. But you can't have it both ways. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Well, I do think that there is a distinction to be made between nationalism and patriotism. In my opinion, nationalism comes from there's a lot of context too, and a lot of different contexts, nationally and globally, where it means different things. And I think that nationalism has been a thing of supremacy in many cases, and that's the kind of nationalism we're seeing a lot in the U.S. at the current moment. And I mean, I have seen flags being burnt, U.S. flags being burnt online and whatnot as well. So I mean, that has
Yeah,
people standing on the flags.
it goes both ways.
That has happened for a while now as well. But I do think that a lot of common sense has to be brought into the conversation, and that the DNC and the establishment left doesn't
Yes.
represent the progressive left or the people of that group, because a lot of the things that they are saying and proposing about, like letting everyone vote no matter who it is, or something. Some of those
Yeah.
things don't make a lot of sense, and it seems like it could be to garner votes and pander possibly. Uh, but I think like a lot of those things the progressives don't necessarily all agree with either. So there's some pluralistic ignorance where people think that they're all on the same page, but individually and
Yeah. They're not.
anonymously they're not. And I personally align more with somebody like Jimmy Dore, who's a foul-mouthed
Yeah, I love
comedian,
him. I love him.
and
It's awesome.
and
Yeah.
I think he's someone like him and someone like me who doesn't really fall in line with the Democratic
All
establishment
of the yeah, and all of the left policies and
and
so
all of
on.
the left
You
policies. Right, you have to look at each one and look at their efficacy and if they make sense in reality, since that's the plane that we all exist on. Uh, but the thing about nationalism and patriotism is that you can be disgusted with your own country. I think that's a legitimate feeling that a lot of people have, and myself included. Sometimes I love
yeah,
America. I love the
yeah,
idea of America, the freedom that we aspire to,
yeah,
and the democracy, and it's technically a republic, but we aspire
yeah,
to democracy. But I think that if you don't have a scrutiny for your own country
yes,
and put yourself on the same shooting or shooting gallery that you would put any other country on it, to say these are the
yeah,
faults, these are the things we need to fix, then I think that's the opposite of what a patriot would do. That's more
yes,
somebody who is just conforming and falling in line
yeah.
and becoming part of how Nazi Germany became what it was. It
Yeah.
was a nationalist socialist party, so they were
That's right.
socialism tempered
People
with
don't know that.
nationalism.
They all say, "Oh, it was, far right." No, it wasn't. It was a national socialist, probably secular, for all you care, party that turned on
But
itself.
far right means authoritarianism. It doesn't necessarily mean
Yeah,
socialism
yeah,
is left.
yeah,
So a
yeah, yeah.
socialist party can be a right party if they are authoritarianist.
That's true.
And
Yeah.
so when we're looking at like a guest I had a few episodes back, Fatali Mogadam, was talking about how dictatorship evolves
Yeah.
and all those sorts of things. And when you have this uber nationalism that kind of makes people blind of their own sins, then you can have people
Yes.
doing horrible things because of this animosity towards other foreign bodies. And
Yes.
when in my opinion, when the global current technological modern world, where the whole of the earth has shrunk because of technology, and we're seeing what the other side of the world is talking about, and we're interacting on this lightning speed interface, we can see a lot more of the things that we don't agree with and that we do agree with. But I kind of went off on a tangent there and forgot what I was.
I just wanted to add, you actually brought up a great point. Nationalism means different things to different
Right.
nations. It Nationalism in America is maybe made in America, make America great again,
America
or America is
first
the great
is what I always think
America
of.
first. And nationalism in India is not make India great again. It's not made in India. It's not India first. For us, especially for us, it's a very peculiar situation because we had 1,000 years of colonization. Not just the British were they colonized, or they occupied us for 250 years. But before that, we had the French and the Portuguese and the Dutch, they were collectively 400 or 500 years that they, kind of illegally occupied a part of India, and they were actually much more brutal than the British. But the only saving grace there was they only had a tiny port in India that they, each of them, with the French it was Pondicherry, with Portuguese it was Goa, these tiny sort of ports that they were able to kind of capture, and eventually we were able to get it back quite easily. The thing with the British was it was a shorter time period, 250 years, but it was a whole country, and they would not leave. Because we were the jewel on their British Empire. And also before the invaders, I mean, before the colonizers, we had the Islamic invaders. People forget that we had about 600 or 700 or 800 years of brutal, barbaric Islamic rule, occupation. And normally they didn't come and rape and pillage and loot and leave. They did rape and pillage and loot us, but they stayed in the country, and then ultimately they became us. And there was, of course, some, that's where the Muslim population in India comes from, because it was Hindu for 4,000 years predominantly. And then we, have this, it's a big population now, but percentage wise it's still small. But so that's the history. And so after 1,000 years of colonization and invasion, we're only now knowing what it is to be Indian and have a strong Indian identity. And it's been very fragmented for a long time. It's very diverse, but, and we are all Indian, but I think people like to blame the caste system. That's not the reason for the division. The feeling of differentness, it got nothing to do with caste system, because Hindus, they all feel Hindu and they all feel one in some way, despite their differences. But it's some of this religious stuff that has happened because one group doesn't want to live with another, or they think that they're so different, and it's more regional than anything else. So nationalism to India is a good thing, because we don't have a Indian identity, even though it's the oldest civilization in many ways, and we should, and it's going to be the most populous country in a few years. I mean, we really ought to get our act together, I think, and have one common identity of being Indian, no matter what your creed, religion, whatever, where you're from, your language, and be proud of that, and just appreciate, I think, because after 60 years of dynasty corrupt political rule, we finally have a good government that puts India first. And this may be there's a lot of people who can't understand this. People who write these smearing headlines about India don't know about this, and they don't look at it from this angle. And they're really being very disingenuous when they want to write about India without understanding Indian identity and Indian history. And then we have a small group of sellouts. I mean, they are like the champagne socialists. They are we call them libtards. I mean, they hate their own culture. They identify with this colonized idea of India. They have a colonial hang-up. And sadly, they have run the media houses and some of the top universities forever. So all the top English newspapers in India, they pump out these kind of anti-India smear. I mean, it's so perversive and subversive. It's worse. The New York Times are tame compared to them. The sort of the anti-India sentiment that they have, yet they're Indian. It's so ridiculous, and it goes beyond criticizing government. It's clear out and out, this is bad, and it's very terrible, and it's not good. So I just wanted to note that nationalism means different things for different people. Right. And in some countries, like India, for example, it's a good thing. And it's something that we haven't had ever. And we're only finally kind of finding our footing. Yes, we'll fall and get up, but I think we're moving in the right direction. And that's important for such a large nation.
And I do think that people should be
completely proud of their culture and their language and their ancestry and where they come from and all those sorts of things. And I think that that is totally possible to do without these imaginary lines being what defines us. And I do think that, I don't speak for the entire progressive left, obviously, but I think that I would say that that a lot of the progressives in America don't have a problem with the peaceful Muslims that practice their religions and the peaceful Christians and all the peaceful religious people who have the philosophy of live and let live,
Yeah.
and I think that that's something that the progressive left and the establishment left both kind of agree with, but where I think they differ is the establishment left kind of runs with that narrative of defending the
Yes.
Muslims at all costs, no matter
Yeah.
what, regardless of context, whereas the progressive
Yes.
left doesn't really do that. And if there is a sect of any religion or any a group of people that are causing terror or doing these things in the name of the religion, then that's where I personally and I think a lot of the people that are like-minded to me would draw the
Yes.
line and say that that's a disgusting thing, and I feel the
It's
same
not
way
okay.
about Muslim terrorists as I do about
Yeah.
Christian terrorists who go around
Yes.
shooting up churches and whatnot, or mosques or whatever in America or anywhere in the world. So I think they're all kind of if you can look at it objectively without, having a specific group that you're trying to defend illegitimately, then we can
Yeah,
all.
because they don't call all terrorist acts out in the same manner, and you can see even they don't condone some as they do the others, and it's yeah, it gets very messy,
Right.
also the reporting, and also you know, I mean, I think this. I wouldn't say that like KKK. I don't. I don't see that as a Christian organization. I think it's not a Christian terrorist group. It's a white supremacist group. So you have to call it what it is. You can't say that ISIS and KKK are on the same. Uh, they're not the same because one is an ideological religious. Well, one is a religious ideology, and the other is kind of more race. And they're both bad, but you can't say that, oh, you can't quote KKK as an example of Christian because there'd be a lot of atheists who are also members of KKK. And then so I think because Islam is very new to America and the UK and Europe, and you're seeing in Europe, I think it's showing the worst of poor assimilation and what happens also when you get political Islam that like the UK is a great example. You have political Islam that's kind of running the show, and they are wonderful Muslim politicians in the UK, but you got a lot of subversive ones that want to bring in certain laws, and they want to shut down conversation on grooming gangs that are happening there, and a lot of ISIS recruitment and serious Sharia infused problems in the UK because it's politically incorrect to talk about it, and you're going to offend a certain group. And look at the state of it. I mean, it's the number one knife crime capital, I think, in Europe, and you have to 16% of the prisons in the UK are occupied by Muslim British Muslim people, and so you have to have an honest conversation about ideology and what some of these institutions are teaching their kids. Whether people choose to act on them or not is their own morality. Thank God for that. But the teaching itself, I think we need to have an honest conversation about
And
that.
I would even question that correlation as well of the percentage of Muslims in prison, because in America there is the same sort of disparity of the ethnic groups that are in prison is
Yeah.
predominantly African American, but I think that that has a lot to do with who the police are going after and who they're
Yeah,
locking up and arresting as well.
oh, but I would the only thing I would say to that is the percentage of Buddhist or Hindu people in the UK prisons is 0%,
Right.
and they're not white, so
Hmm.
they look actually Indian and Pakistani people look exactly the
Right.
same. So it's not they're not locking up people for no reason. The grooming gangs where the British white police people don't even want to go to these zones. They're no-go zones. They don't even
Hmm.
want to go there because they can't even fight them. They'll be outnumbered, and also they have it's a so this is what there have been people in the UK trying to uh, talk about these things, and they got shut down badly,
Hmm.
and that's when political Islam takes over.
Well,
It's very dangerous. It's already
and that's kind of what I was saying too about the political Islam and the political Christian side of things. I think
yes,
that they're very similar in the aspect that these people who are the Christian KKK members, they're not representing Christians, and we can all agree to
no,
that. But then
yeah,
the radical Islam somehow represent all Muslims in some sense.
yeah, because yeah, it does because the problem is, look, I grew up in the Middle East, and
Hmm.
I speak Arabic, and I've read holy books of all faiths. There are a lot of violent stanzas and verses in many books, with Christianity, it kind of went through. They did have religious wars, but and forced conversions and all that, but they went through a reform thousands of years ago. That hasn't happened in Islam, and it
Hmm.
never will, because they take their book to be the word of God, the final word of God. You can't reform that. If you speak to ex-Muslims and Muslims who are now atheists, they will be very clear in talking about this, how the reform in Islam is impossible, because they good even peaceful Muslims, they take the book as the final word of God, and you can't tamper with that, which is fair enough. I
As do
respect that.
Christians.
But
I'd have to push
no, but
back on
there
that
was
as
a
well.
reform. They're not. No, no, but there was no. They're not blowing up, twin towers and things in the name of Jesus, like you do see it the other way around. So, and they the yeah. So there was a reform in Christianity, some sort of reform.
Hmm.
The forced conversions, I have a problem with the evangelists. I think my
Hmm.
issue with right is more towards the evangelists when they say things like yoga is the work of the devil.
Hmm.
That's when I have me being an Indian
Right.
spiritual person, that affects me very personally, and it's very
Well,
vile, and it's very
there's
misguided, and
definitely a level
it's
of
bad.
intolerance even in the peaceful Christians, and I've seen
Yes,
that, and I grew
level
up
of,
in it. I breathed that water. So
yeah, level of intolerance and level of ignorance, I
mhm.
would say, is, like they think that if you don't believe in their version of God, you don't believe in God,
Mhm.
you're a pagan or something like that, for
And your
God's sake,
God
so
is
I
the devil, basically.
yeah, and the whole idol worshippers thing and
Hmm.
all that, I think that affects me personally, and I'm like, especially me being an Indian and a Hindu, I'm like, look, if you're going to have that argument, look, you need to look at the global landscape of terrorism and violence in the world, and you tell me
Hmm.
how much of that is coming from pagans and atheists and idol worshippers
Hmm.
and all of that, and you tell me how much of that is coming from organized monotheistic religions, and your
Hmm.
answer is right there. Which leads us, I think, to the next topic,
Right.
which is this. Isn't it true? It's how interesting that yeah, this organized religion it's problematic,
Hmm.
and people are not. I think they're too scared to call it out, because they want to call out the other group, but they can't call out their own, because they're also part of that bigger umbrella of organized religion. So they have to target specific, religions, instead of saying, oh, all religions are bad.
Hmm.
And I don't believe that all religions are bad, because I don't think that they're equally vile and violent, some worse than others, and
Hmm.
some not really violent at all, I would say. Yeah, and some are not even religions, they're just. kind of ways of being.
And yeah, and I would agree with that as well. And I have seen that there's a certain intolerance for in the South. Apparently, I've seen saw a video recently of a pastor who was saying that the police should be going around killing gay people, and I know that that's not like a typical evangelistic pastor. I'm sure this is a just a a little a
One off.
one-off maybe, but the fact that that exists means that
Yeah.
there are these radical versions of pretty much.
Yes. And they're taking their book literally, because I'm sure in the
Mhm.
Bible there are some verses. It's not saying
There are, yeah.
um, this is a good thing. They're not saying LGBT is a thing. Although people joke about it, they're like, Jesus, was he gay? I mean, he was hanging out with 12 dudes all the time,
Hmm.
right? He didn't have any women in his life. I mean, I don't know about that, but but if you tell this to the evangelists, they'll blow you up.
And and what were your thoughts about yoga in the West?
Oh my God, thank you for bringing this up. This is such a big topic. So, yoga is something very dear to myself because it's a part of my culture and I'm very proud of it. It's funny that Kashmir actually happens to be the seat of yoga in the world, because the person who wrote the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali, and his the descendants came from the valley of Kashmir. Even the name of Kashmir comes from the sage Kashyapa, who was an Indian Hindu sage many years ago, and his people ended up writing the Yoga Sutras. So, in a way, the nucleus of spirituality is Kashmir. So it's such a important thing to hold on to that in a deeper sense, or to not lose the spirituality, because it's had a demographic change where it changed religions, right? It became over majority Muslim in a matter of decades, and it's forgetting its own roots in a way, which is very sad and dangerous. But so yoga essentially means union of the mind, body, and spirit. The one of the You don't find this in India, but I was shocked and baffled to see it out here in the West at some by some yoga people themselves. This narrative that yoga is not religious. I actually disagree with that. I think I believe that it's not a religious um, practice, but it's a Hindu practice. And Hinduism is not a religion by that
Hmm.
logic. So I think it's very important because in the West here, I see a disassociation of yoga from Vedic tradition, from Hinduism. You can't remove it from India because that's where it came from, and you can't refute that. But I think there's some, pseudo yoga teachers here in the West at conferences. They try to say, "Oh, yoga is not Hindu; it's a secular practice." That's actually very, very disingenuous, and that is very insulting to actual Hindus, where it is a part of our faith. I'm a Hindu. I don't consider Hinduism as a religion at all. And by the way, there is no such thing as Hinduism, because the real name for Hinduism is Sanatan Dharma, and that's the root of Indic faiths. So Sanatana Dharma gave root to Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Hinduism is you would call. I mean, some people don't use the word Hinduism; they just use Sanatana Dharma. But there's this kind of very malicious attempt by, I don't know what I'm trying to. I mean, I'm sure there are some. There's a reason for it. Why would you try to disassociate a beautiful practice from the faith that it comes from? Because look at the how it breaks down. Yoga is a Vedic science. The Vedas are the holy books and holy scriptures of Hindus. So a Vedic science, which is part of those scriptures, would be part of Hinduism. So for us, and yoga, by the way, is not just the asana. The asana is the physical postures. So here in the West, it's become a stretching exercise, and that's not what yoga is. Yoga is an eight limbed uh, kind of a religious traditional philosophy. One of those eight limbs is the asana, which is the physical postures, but there are others. There's meditation, there is knowledge, there is vegetarianism, there is moksha, which is spiritual liberation, there is speaking the truth, there is mindfulness. So all these things are Vedic principles, and they form what is called yoga. And in India, we yogis are people who follow all of them. And as even as a in school or in general upbringing, people are taught meditation and mantras, and most people are vegetarian, and ahimsa, non-violence. People think ahimsa is a Buddhist concept. It's not. It's a Hindu concept, just like dharma, karma, moksha. They're all Hindu Vedic dharmic concepts, and but they've been sort of appropriated so I guess in such a bad way, where people are, I even hear Steve Bannon talking about dharma and karma. Oh my God, I mean, it's hilarious. I'm like, hey, I'm happy that everyone says karma these days. Everyone says dharma. Oh, I want to find my dharma in life. It's a beautiful thing, but you have got to give some respect to where it came from, because somehow they're trying to disassociate it from the knowledge system that it came from, which is Sanatana Dharma, which is Hinduism. You can't do that. I think that's very bigoted. And it's not okay, because you don't do that with other religions. You don't say that, baptism is not Christian, it's just spiritual. I mean, very specifically Christian. Sufism, by the way, is a beautiful kind of mystical arm of Islam. So a Sufi practice, which I've done, like whirling or chanting, it's wonderful, but it's an Islamic practice. You can't say it's not Islam, it has nothing to do with Islam. It's Sufi, it's esoteric. That's not true. That's a little bit like yoga, you can't say, oh no, it's not Hindu, it's some spiritual philosophical thing. It's not. It's very Hindu. We have Sanskrit mantras. We invoke the Surya god, the Surya, and the names of the poses are in Sanskrit. They are very specific. We chant. We have a mantra at the beginning. We invoke our deities. It's very Hindu in many ways. So, and you're asked to become a vegetarian, and you're asked to follow the tenets of yoga when you do the poses. Proper yoga, Ashtanga and Iyengar yoga, follow it properly. They understand it's a Hindu practice. So what is the end to this? What is the solution to this? I don't know. I think there has got to be number one awareness, because when you have a
Excuse me.
situation where you're not even having people having a conversation like I'm having, talking that saying things like it is very much part of our faith and religion, faith and culture, it is. And you have got to have some reform at some point. I don't know how you got to regulate it in a way that I think is very hard to do, because it's been so taken over. But you got to do something. I as a Indian and as a Hindu and as a yoga instructor, as a practitioner, I'm very appalled, I think, by the state of yoga in the West, and how they use terms like namaste
Excuse
and
me.
everything. I mean, if I have to hear one more English white chick called Lakshmi, go on about, all these things, it just, I flip out, So the beautiful thing about Hindu culture is it's open, it's an open source system, it's open technology, it's for the world to use, and the world has benefited from it for thousands of years. So many things like science, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, so many wonderful philosophical concepts have come from Hindu thought and Vedic tradition. Uh, Finally, we're having a situation where historians are giving it the credence that it needs, because I think for too long people wouldn't even cite the source. There have been so many wonderful thought leaders and philosophers that were so in awe of Vedic philosophy, and but they didn't even say that I got this thought from there. It's only now that I think they're uncovering. Now there's a huge movement where quantum physicists and scientists are even talking about really deep scientific concepts that they first found its origins in Vedic texts that they didn't want to tell the world about, because guess what, bigotry was around ever. It's not a new concept, it was always there. They sort of appropriated it and claimed it as their own, and it's only now that we have some fair historians and scientists talking about these things, where they are talking about where is his origin, and what even something like plastic surgery and surgery, even the word sutra, which is in even in medical terms today, in a hospital today, in an operation, the doctor will tell the nurse, we need to do a sutra for this patient. Sutra is a Sanskrit word that means binding. And the first uh, example of plastic surgery was rhinoplasty, nose job that was done thousands of years ago. To this was in India.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the world needs to know about this.
Mm-hmm.
It baffles me that such an old ancient tradition with so much wisdom, where has the why, as a world people, why do we not know about it, but yet we know so much about Greek mythology and Greek philosophy when it was 3,000 years newer
Mm-hmm.
uh, than the old Indus civilization. So that's where
Mm-hmm.
that's where I see yoga going. I'm happy to see that people are bettering themselves, but I'm not happy to see some of the hijacking and the distortions and the misappropriations that's happening, by the way, from the yoga community. It's not happening from some outsider. It's
Mm-hmm.
happening from people who have benefited greatly from the very technique itself, that are out there to smear India and Hinduism in such a way, which is not okay.
And is it the attribution of where it's coming from? Is that the part that kind of bothers you the most, or is it the separation from the religious aspect in the practice of yoga in the West?
I think it's not so much separation of religious aspect, but it is separation of philosophical aspect and separation of sort of
Mm-hmm.
tradition. Um, you can't sort of take what you like and throw away the rest, which is what's happening with yoga and in general with Hinduism. Because even when you look at meditation, I hear people like Eckhart Tolle, he goes on about presence and the present moment. These concepts were, available first in some of the Hindu Shastras and the Vedas and the Gita and all of our ancient texts. So it's been around, and the Western, there's a lot of German philosophers that have massively researched Hindu history, and they have been inspired and they've taken these concepts, but they don't give it the respect and the acknowledgement. And that's, I think there's some kind of internal, I don't know what to say, I don't want to say bigotry or racism, but what is it? It's something that doesn't let you, what's the matter? It's not sexy enough for you. You have to, I
Right.
don't like it. It's not, I think it's one thing for maybe Western people or American people or Europeans don't get it because
Mm-hmm.
it's not their culture. But for me, I do get it. And I find it
Mm-hmm.
quite offensive because, and also there's a lot of Indians who don't get it, but they're not in this field. They may be lawyers or doctors. They know very little themselves of their own history.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have a problem with any of this stuff. But if you are in this field, you will see the bigotry that exists, and it's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny. Tulsi Gabbard is a candidate that we both like. I really am such a big fan of hers, and her policies are fantastic, and she's such a composed leader. But she's a practicing Hindu, and some of the I was shocked to see some of the attacks on her as a candidate, as a
Mm-hmm.
policymaker, actually come from a subversive source of religious bigotry, where people just don't like that, or they're attacking her for her personal faith.
Mm-hmm.
And this attack on her, by the way, is not coming from the right. They actually give her a fair platform. I've seen her on more right platforms. I think she has a good space there. But have seen her, the DNC screw over with her, and so many things from her own people. And there is this underlying, oh, this is her faith, and she's, there are other Indian Hindus out there, but she's I think that she even has mentioned this in an interview once, that the her presidential candidacy has shed light on religious bigotry that exists in America, and it does.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a good example of that, and I find it unjustifiable. It's one thing if Hindus were blowing up buildings every other day and you're a bit concerned about her faith. It's not the case at all. Why the hate? What is going on? It baffles
And
me.
and I'm not, obviously we are going to come in contact with different information, but I have seen a lot of criticism from her about her on the right as well as the left, and
Yes.
and it is pertinent to point out the fact that she does have quite a bit of history with the DNC and possibly a lot of bad blood there when she removed herself from the DNC. And
The conversion. Oh, that too, and also the conversion thing. But I think that's far removed
but
now.
and as far as the Hindu thing, I think that you know kind of welcome to America. There's never been anyone but a Christian president, except for just a couple exceptions, and they were just non-practicing, non-religious.
Well, Obama is one of them. I think people fail. They don't want to go there, but I'm sorry that those are the facts. It's even in his name. Yeah, non-practicing for sure, but you can't remove his own
But I mean,
heritage,
his
because
outright. I mean, he, I believe, declared himself as a Christian.
yes, but his father was a Muslim, and his name Hussein,
Right. Barack
as
Hussein.
Muslim as it gets. You can't sort of,
Right.
and his foreign policy, I have a lot of criticism for was, I think it was atrocious. I think some of he was a little too soft on all this radical Islamic terrorism. And also with Iran, and he was trying to negotiate with people that you're, you can't negotiate with terrorists. They're beyond that. So I was very disappointed with how much the left shields him and applaud him when I see through the cracks. And I think it was, and I think some of the criticism that comes from the right of him and his sort of governance was very legitimate. In this foreign policy area, it was very
In that
bad.
particular area, there's a lot of other criticism from the right
Yeah,
that just has a lot to do with
yeah,
bigotry and
sure,
and
sure, sure. Of course, of course.
and so and I personally, at the time, I voted for Obama. I was a fan of Obama in the moment because, like
Yeah.
a lot of people, he's a charismatic guy, and he seems like a decent fellow. And as far as the reporting went at the time, there wasn't a lot of good information about the sorts of things that he was doing. And in hindsight, there's more obvious things like the bailouts
Yes.
to the bankers and
And the
and the
deportations and all of that.
deportations and all of those things
Yeah.
that under the Trump presidency would be under so much scrutiny. And that's why I personally think a president like Obama is slightly more dangerous to just our
Because
global politics.
it's a wolf in sheep's clothing in that context, in that particular
That he
sense.
doesn't
Yeah.
garner any scrutiny that a
Yes.
president or any leader should have,
Yes.
and that Trump is kind of the opposite in that sense that
Yeah,
everything.
he's getting way too much scrutiny, and even for some of he's done some very good things too, and all he gets is venom and hate.
Well, I
So
think he's made some choices that make sense and some choices that don't make
yes,
sense, which is true of every single presidency. But
yeah,
I think the part that really sets him aside and sets him apart from all the previous presidents is that he kind of threw the rule book out of the window from day one,
yeah,
and has used a lot of the divisiveness that is currently part of the political landscape to his
yeah.
advantage, and used that kind of demagoguery to rally up these people who are sometimes going to be voting against their own best interest in the case of a lot of the factory workers whose jobs they're seeing deported out of the country now at this time. So I think that there's definitely problems with with all of the presidents
Yeah.
that we've had so far, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that they are figureheads more than they are actual, you know,
Policymakers and
policymakers.
to enforcers,
Right.
that's true. But I have some good news for you. She made it to the fourth. She's going to be doing the fourth debate.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure that's what I saw in the news today. So I guess this is going to be a
Hmm.
trip. I really want to see who she's going to take down
And
next.
I really appreciate Tulsi's
Yes.
anti-regime change
Or
war stance on the military, um, and if there's people on the right that support that, I'm excited about that because I think that's one thing that the establishment on both the right and the left are both for is war. Uh,
And I was shocked to see, aren't you shocked as someone who identifies with, you're more the left, I would say, but you, the pro-war stance that has been coming from the DNC, it's
I'm not
appalling.
shocked at all,
You're like,
actually.
really?
I'm not surprised
I
one
think
bit.
many people, I was a little worried. I'm like, because what, I like, you should be behind someone like Tulsi, who's totally
Hmm.
against all this bull crap. And the way that they are so, even all the left, even CNN, and even the host, everyone, the way that they take her
Hmm.
down for such a good policy, it just baffles
Well,
me. I'm like, what is going on with you
and
guys?
I've seen the mainstream media take down whoever they need to
Yeah.
do the bidding of whoever's running the show there. But it does seem like uh, and I keep losing my train of thought here. But what were we just talking about the
We were talking about religion and
religion?
the
Yes.
religious ideologies and stuff. No, yoga in the West,
Hmm.
and and also Tulsi. She came up, and I'm happy to see her. And yeah, I mean, I think religion and politics is so intertwined now
Hmm.
in a way that they've never been, now, because now they've become political tools, I guess, in some way, in many ways. So but also getting back to religions, yeah, I think people need to realize that organized monotheistic religions are problematic. And one point that people don't sort of, people who are, whether they're Christians or Muslims, they don't sort of talk about is uh, sort of the lack of mutual respect that exists in the exclusivist mentality that exists in these monotheistic religions, where it's there's only one God, there's only one book, there's only one prophet, and uh, there's only one version of the truth, and my God is better than yours. And if you don't believe in him, you're going to
Hmm.
hell. This is pretty much the rhetoric you hear from all of the monotheistic religions. And I come from a faith that is uh, extremely polytheistic, and
Hmm.
it's not even a religion, but whatever it is, it's so open and tolerant and always has been. In fact, the essence of Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma is all paths can take you to the divine. All paths can take you to moksha, which is the ultimate goal of life, which is spiritual liberation. They're essentially saying you can be a Christian, you can read the Bible and pray to Jesus Christ, just be a good human being and you can attain moksha.
Hmm.
Christianity will not tell you the same about Hinduism. It doesn't say, yeah, you can, you know, love Shiva and you can enter
Hmm.
the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't say that. And neither does Islam or even the Jewish faith. Judaism doesn't either, although they don't preach and convert so much. But they have also, their books are very dogmatic, and I mean, they're very rigid as well. So that's a big difference between what I would call as monotheistic religions, Abrahamic faiths, and Indic religions, which are, these four uh, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Sanatana Dharma, which is Hinduism, which came out of, I guess, they came out from India. But there's others. There's Baha'i faith. There's
Hmm.
Zoroastrianism. There are pagans, atheists, agnostics, new atheists. All these people, they don't have an exclusivist ideology. They're not about God or a prophet. Some of them don't even have a book. It's just about being a good human being a moral person, doing the right thing, you know, respecting
Hmm.
the divine source, know the universal consciousness. and live and let be. So I think the world would do better with that kind of framework. And I'm even going to be writing a book on this kind of dharmic framework as a future of humanity, as a future for humanity. I think it's a good model to have, and there are different facets to it. But one of them would be complete mutual respect for all faiths and religion, and uh, real freedom to it. I think this is secular. U.S. is secular in the sense that you can practice whatever faith you want. However, it's predominant. It's a Christian faith. It's a Christian nation, and you have to understand that as long as it doesn't infiltrate into the legal system, sometimes
And
it
it
has
does.
some
Yeah.
for the sometimes you can't do that. If it's truly secular, because secularism means total separation. India is secular. India is the perverse example of secularism, where you have a situation there where 85% of the country is one religion. However, technically, you can't call that country of that religion. So technically, India is not a Hindu nation, even though Hinduism originated there. So I think that's where secularism goes too far,
And
where
oh, go ahead. What were you saying?
no, I was yeah, it has, I think it's hurt a lot of proud Hindus who are like, what are you doing? And the constitution is predominantly, it's very anti-religion. It's very kind of, and it kind of does not shield the majority religion. So the minorities actually have more rights there.
Well, and like how some people do say that America is a Christian nation, and there is a statistical majority of Christians in America, but we can't forget that America was founded on secularism and separation of church and state, and freedom from religion, or freedom of religion, to practice any religion that you want to.
And that's what a true democracy is, right? Yeah.
And that's my previous guest Fatali Mogadam, he would say that there is no pure democracy anywhere in the world, that all forms of democracy are tempered with other forms of economic and political systems. And to go back to the point of why has yoga been kind of removed from this in the West, and I think it comes down to a pretty simple situation of marketability, and as well as who is the ones propagating this new form of yoga. They aren't necessarily going to be Hindus. So
Yeah, that's right. They're not Indians or Hindus. They're West people who don't, they're usually agnostic. They're not Christian. I mean, they're people who probably are spiritual but not religious, right? They don't identify with any religion as such. Uh, and you're right, it's marketability, but it shouldn't be, because I think it doesn't happen with other spiritual practices as it does with yoga. And it's not okay though, because I think in the process you alienate, or it's kind of a gross injustice to the truth of what yoga really is. And I think now they're going, it's one thing to not mention the its Hindu roots or connection, but I think they're going out of their way to say that it's definitely not, like Hinduism is a bad thing. I think they're painting a inaccurate picture of the faith where this comes from. And that's also not okay. And sometimes it comes out of ignorance, and sometimes it's just coming from just pure, uh, I don't know, some kind of malice in some weird form. I don't
well,
get
it's
that at
it's
all.
fear
But
of the other. I
it does,
think a lot has to do with it. It's a lot of it
yeah.
is
But
human
this
nature
group
and history.
shouldn't, you're right, but this group of spiritual but not religious shouldn't have fear of other spiritual wisdom faiths. And we were not talking about radical Islam or something like that has been problematic for the world at large. We're talking about something very different, and
Right.
I think they need to know the difference between the faiths and know their histories,
Well,
maybe.
if you go back to the earlier times in these religions' history, and you follow them along the timeline, you see these monotheistic Abrahamic religions became very militaristic and spread
Oh
out
yeah.
across the world.
World.
So
Yeah.
by very virtue of a peaceful, secularist kind of
Yeah.
religion, it it by the nature of that has no other option than to kind of get trampled on a little bit, because the
Yeah.
machine of the West and
You're
the
right about that. The
imperialism.
Indic faiths have suffered. They have suffered. They Buddhism was wiped out of the face of India by people don't realize that. They always ask me, Buddhism came from India. Buddha was a Indian. He was a Hindu Indian prince. What happened? It was flourishing at one point, and then it just disappeared. Well, we had Islamic invaders come, and that's how they got destroyed. But why didn't Hinduism get destroyed? Because Buddhism was conformed to the monasteries, and Hinduism persevered through society. So it was a layperson's faith, and Buddhism was study and sort of more. You go to a monastery, go to a monk, you learn. And so that's why when the invaders came, they were able to just destroy all the monasteries, and with it, it took out the religion. But with Hinduism, it was everyone and his dog was, it was so in their blood. You can't, they, yes, they massacred a lot of people, but you can't kill hundreds of millions of people either. They never, they failed miserably in India. The global, um, I guess that dream of a caliphate, that stops in India. It failed miserably. It's like a, that's why I think there's a lot of Islamic groups as well that are very anti-India, because on some deep level, India is it's like their biggest failure, because wherever they go, they convert the whole land within a matter of decades. And with India, even after 800 years, they got minimum 10%. And even that too with cross marriages and conversions and stuff. So it's not like anybody actually out of their own love and seeking decided to convert. So you find this deep disdain for Hinduism that comes from Arab world and a lot of Muslims, and they can't explain it maybe, but India represents, and even in one of their hadith, which is, so you have the Quran, and then you have the Prophet's sayings. One of them is clearly, they talk about the caliphate, the global caliphate, but they talk about India being like, this is the great land with so many people. We need to get to this land and do the conversion, which never happened and will never happen, thankfully. So
And what is the
that
caliphate?
remains to be. Caliphate is like, Ottoman Empire a long time ago had this dream of turning the whole world into a Islamic state. And they did that when they went to Iran, Iraq,
Right.
Lebanon,
Right.
Afghanistan, because all these they had different religions. They had Zoroastrianism, they were atheist, pagan, whatever. Indonesia had Indic roots and all that, but they converted them. And but it stopped at India. It was
Okay.
unable to
So
succeed
it's just
there.
a
So it's
term for
interesting.
the proliferation of Islam, pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's a huge distinction between those religions is the type of
Yeah.
religion that conquers and recruits, opposed to the
Yes.
religion that says, "Come if you will," but you
Yes.
know, at your own volition, if it's something,
Yes.
So there's a huge difference in the way that would proliferate across the world, and I think that is probably a huge reason why we see a lot of this stuff just kind of omitted from any of the information, is that Hindus probably weren't the ones that was giving out the information in those areas. They were people who had
That's
appropriated the
true.
information and
Yeah.
repurposed
It
it
was
and
people.
co-opted it for their own
You're
benefit.
you're so right. Even historians, like even people who write about India, Indologists, they're all German. You didn't for the longest time, you didn't have actual Indian people who research about India and write about India. You have these German people who are fascinated with India. They don't speak Sanskrit. They're not Hindu. They're not Indian. Some of them never even went to India. They just did a lot of self-study, and they came up with these interesting concepts, and they put them out. They got them published, and it's only recently that they've all been refuted and refuted and like demystified, because they came up with a lot of inaccurate things about India and Indian history very distorted. And it's only recently that a ton of research has been done to really correct all of that. So I'm happy to say that it's happening. It's not happening fast enough, but it's slowly happening. And also, the other interesting issue is the new atheists. So there was a time when you had people like Richard Dawkins and even Christopher Hitchens, I think, and many, many sort of atheists who they didn't believe in any religion, any God, any faith, anything, no universal consciousness. They were just pure scientists. But now you're getting people like Sam Harris who concede, and I'm happy to see that they are, who say that no, you can be mindful, you can meditate, there is a presence, there's something beyond just science. There's something that you can't explain that we know that is beautiful and happening, and we are all connected energetically and all of that. So even science is now sort of coming to where spirituality has been. I don't think that science has always been at the forefront. I don't think that science has the answers. I think for the most important questions in life that are who are we, where did I come from, where am I going? I don't think science has the answers. I think spiritual philosophies and traditions have the answer because they have eternally answered those. And that's why you look at some of these Indic faiths. All they are is about who am I, where am I going, and they talk about we are not the mind and the body, but we are the soul, the Atma, that the spirit that is inside, and the Atma never dies. That's why in Hinduism we believe in reincarnation and many lives, because when the body dies, the spirit does not die, and nor does it go to heaven or hell. If it has gained moksha, it goes back into universal consciousness. But if it has not gained moksha, it will wait to reincarnate into another body and mind so that it gets another run on what we call planet Earth. And that's our brief concept of Hinduism, which is why, and that's where the concept of karma comes from. Because karma is also not just, it's not like action reaction. Karma is of the soul. So it's the soul that's the karmic blueprint. So you you look at someone like Donald Trump and you think, how is this man? He has so much power and, maybe he's done some wrong things. Well, who knows what he was in his past life? Could have been a incredible human being, which has been lots of gifts, born into a very fortunate family, and he has the karma of someone very, very fortunate and great power. And what he chooses to do with it will yield future karma. Maybe his next lifetime will be miserable because of the actions of this lifetime. But you can't blame someone and say this person is a bad person, but they're rich. Why? I think the concept of karma proves that the soul doesn't die. There is Atma, and there is universal consciousness, which is the Brahman. So but it's nice to see these new atheists kind of concede that there's a middle ground. I think my only problem with them is, again, some of them, they don't cite where some of this, because even someone like Sam Harris, he's someone who's traveled to India and Nepal, learned meditation, met the monks, has some knowledge of Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism and so on. And he distinguishes Abrahamic religions from Indic faiths, but I think he needs to be more clear of a lot of the things that he talks about. They do have a root in Sanatana Dharma, and he can't just, he can't just lump all faiths in one corner and say, oh no, this is nothing to do with faith. It's nothing to do with science either. You have to understand that there are philosophical, spiritual concepts within the framework of faiths that he has clearly touched on. And he talks about Buddhism, but I think it's a bit disingenuous when 80% of Buddhism does come from Hinduism, and he doesn't, I think, do a fair job of giving enough credence to the original source of it all, which is Sanatana Dharma, which kind of gave roots to, which gave the birth to or fruits to some of these other faiths. So I have a problem with that issue with some of these sort of new atheists. I think they either haven't done their deep research, or they have, but they don't want to, you know, I don't know.
Attribute
They
it.
don't want to be honest about where they found this great knowledge because it takes away from their own originality to say that, oh yeah, I read it in this Vedic Shastra, that was around thousands of years ago.
And as somebody who came from a Christian background myself, I came from that growing up, was raised as that, and as a child I wanted to be a pastor. I was very passionate about it as a youngster, but at some point I I think just my own understanding of reality and the world has had pushed me into pretty much pure atheism, and until somewhat recently, I've kind of come to a point to where I believe in certain things like collective consciousness and things like that, and I think it's come from just a conglomeration of just different podcasts, different information, all these sorts of things. I don't actually know where I got the information from myself, but I think that that's something that does kind of happen when like from Christianity even I've kind of cherry picked the bits and pieces that I like about you know how kind of how who Jesus was. He was seemed like a really
Yeah,
good person, and I think
he was a yogi. He was a yogi person. He was a real yogi.
and I think that me, someone who doesn't even believe in that necessarily there was a man named Jesus, because I can't confirm it, uh, but possibly there was, and there was, multiple scriptures written from different areas about him, so there's a good chance. But there was also a story written about Atlantis, so we can go back as far as we want in the history and find this information, and we can take it literally or metaphorically or a number of combinations. But I think at some point we all have to kind of figure out what makes sense to us, and for a lot of us, I think just kind of being pigeonholed into a strict religion, as far as this is how it is, you have to do all of this. It's just not appealing for a lot of people, and I think that may be another part of that equation as to why maybe people just take the bits they like, the mindfulness, the meditation, the stretching, and turn that into their own version of yoga, and leave out the
Yeah,
other bits, whether that's something they did intentionally or they were taught that. There's a
yeah.
number of things that could be going on there. Um, but what are your thoughts on that?
That's a good point. Yeah, it may suit them, but it's not one, they're not getting the full. You can't reject all the philosophy and just take some bits because then you're not really getting the totality of everything. I mean, you can practice yoga. You don't have to be a Hindu.
Hmm.
Some do become a Hindu after they're so affected by when they really read about it. They know that it's the path for them.
Hmm.
Uh, so in that way you don't have to be a Hindu to practice yoga, but I think it's a bit dangerous because some people who just want to take the stretching and they don't know about the rest, or they don't want to take the rest, I think they're a bit half baked, also because yoga is deep and you're only getting a little bit of it. There's much more to that philosophy. You can't, like, I think in the West is very much, it's transactional. It's like, okay, I have back pain, let me do some yoga to cure it. They're not talking about their soul, and they're not talking about the deep holistic problem, the holistic
Hmm.
void that exists within. They're just trying to fix problems, and yoga and meditation and mindfulness fixes some problems, but not their real full outlook in life, and not their world at large, and not the way that they live.
Hmm.
So you have to, I think, look at the totality of it. You're maybe doing yourself a bit of injustice by not really doing enough research, or not really accepting other philosophies as well that come along with yoga. And also, of course, it's a bit disrespectful to the faith that it comes from, because although you're welcome to use things for your benefit, I think to disassociate from it is not right. It's okay if you say, no, I just like yoga and that's it. But if you're in turn ridiculing Hinduism and yet you're benefiting from yoga, which seems to be
Hmm.
happening now, I think a lot, I see it. People are quick to They want to say they don't know anything about India or Hinduism. They love yoga, but they're quick to say bad things about the caste system or whatever when they're clueless about that origin as well. That is very dangerous and very disingenuous, and I find it very racist and bigoted. You know, you can't do that, and then you're framing Hindu people as bad people, and they did nothing just because you didn't understand their culture properly.
And I think
Um,
and that particular aspect of it, I think, does have a lot to do with social sciences and
yeah,
social norms and
what's taught also in schools and universities, because all the wrong things are being taught. I've noticed in the US universities and schools, even from for kids, like when they do study religions, they seem to, and there was a big lawsuit about this. I don't know if you knew this, but the California Board of Education was uh, I don't know, 600 Indian Hindu families, I think, collectively, there was a case against California Board for their appalling depiction of Hinduism, and they were portraying even Islam as a peaceful religion, and Hinduism, the way that they were trading it, completely baseless stuff, and the way that they were going on about things that caste system is not doesn't have anything to do with Hinduism as a faith. Caste system is a socio-economic norm that was used to divide society by their functions. You know, the person of the high castes were the priests. They were penniless. The billionaires were people in the middle. So it has nothing to do with money or power. It's got nothing to do with patriarchy or sort of a patriarchal legacy or anything like that. They divide a society based on functions. And you were born in, if your father was a priest, you became a priest yourself. That's just how the cookie crumbled, you know, and it still does to a big extent. And the British, when they came, when they realized all these fragmentations in Indian Hindu culture, they decided that it's a great way to divide India. And they used, so they are very casteist because they have a class system in Britain which still exists, and it's actually atrocious. So, and they have a high class and low class. You know, their high class is actually rich and powerful, and the working class is not, as opposed to what is going on in India and has been going on. So they impose their version of a class system to India, and that's how this modern day caste system was born. And now you have people who hate Hinduism, and you get enemies from all over who want to bring down India as well. They only have a few weapons. One of them is a caste system, which, by the way, has been abolished in constitutionally, but it's a socioeconomic norm. And I find this appalling also in some factions of like the left, far left, and these Marxists. They somehow they really have taken up this cause of this lower caste and casteism in India, which they don't know anything about, and they have taken up this uh, cause as their own, and they're fighting for it and when you see a kind of anti-India, or even like I've seen even at Tulsi, her talks and stuff, you see one person with some banner and he's talking about Hinduism and the caste system, and I think, wow, you must be so retarded because you don't know anything about it, and you're bringing up some social, like a social issue that has nothing to do with faith, you know, and so again, but so there was a case that was fought against the California board, and they won. And they had to change their horrible textbooks and the depiction of this faith in the way that they were. And it was malicious because you get boards of, you get student school boards and boards of religious religion of department of religion in universities. You'll get boards, and sometimes they're very anti-India and kind of very anti-Hindu, and they you get endowments as well and stuff by other groups, and then they make sure that the narrative is very unfavorable. uh So that's something that people don't know about. Why do we see? Because Hindu phobia is not in public sentiment. It's I've only seen it in two places. I've seen it in Western mainstream media or mainstream media in general, and I've seen it in academia.
Hmm.
That's it. I have not seen it so much with any public discourse or anything else, thankfully, because there is no kind of evidence to that. But with media and academia, there is a narrative that can be formed, and you have lobbies, you have agendas.
Hmm.
They can make anything look and feel as they like, and I think that's what they have been doing with relation to this particular issue. And people are seeing it, and they're kind of outraged about it.
And I did learn about the caste system in India in high school myself in
Yeah.
America, and just taught basically that it was a system to, like you say, separate the classes, and that there were the untouchables and all those different aspects of it.
Yeah.
But it does seem like there was an emphasis on the negative aspects of it, and there's
Yes.
probably a lot of context missing as well. And I personally think that context is one of the most important things when it comes to any discussion, because if we can't look at these situations in the context where they're formed, then we really don't have the information and knowledge that we need to make a informed decision about any of it. And that seems to be what happens a lot, is that people
Yeah.
see cultures and things happening outside of their own, and because
Yeah.
it's not part of their societal norms, it does have this disgust effect, or this feeling of that's barbarism or some other thing, and not just Hinduism, but, and I personally haven't heard, like you say, any Hindu phobia really, but I know that there's different ways it may manifest itself, like the
In
omitting
media and
things. And
academia, and it's interesting because so in your textbooks they didn't talk about yoga, but they want to talk about something that's not even related to religion, but yoga and
Mhm.
meditation and karma and all these things that are actually part of Hinduism. They don't include things that are not part of Hinduism.
Mhm.
They want to, and they don't do that for other faiths where the religion blatantly says kill the non-believers.
And in my class, I mean, that wasn't even a lesson on Hinduism. That was just a lesson on, you know, history and India.
Yeah.
So.
But still, it's all connected, It's
Mhm.
you can't. Was there a class on the history of the 1400 years of the Islamic invasion in India? No, I don't think there was,
No.
right? Even in India, they don't teach that, and we had it for 800 years. So where are you going to go from there?
Mhm.
When you don't even know your own facts and know your own history, they romanticize the colonizers, they romanticize their invaders.
Mhm.
That's how they're, so because we had this small group of it's just subversive sellouts who very colonized mind, and their idea of India was something else than what it actually was, and they imposed all of these thinkings, and then the West just went with that because they don't know the original Indian thinkers and thoughts and all that. So
Eh,
so it's a very dangerous
mhm.
game that academia, and that's California board. It's atrocious to think that California would do that, and especially when there is so many problems with so many other religious ideologies. We're seeing it in even in our own time, and yet you want to touch on, but it's not politically correct to talk about the truths, but you want to talk about these kind of half truths that are out
Mhm.
there about other faiths just to make them look bad, and that leads to bullying and Hindu phobia and
Mhm.
people, Hindu kids not feeling good about themselves when their religion is quite peaceful.
Yeah, and I think that kind of sets the Hindu religion apart from some of the other ones, and
Yeah.
but then it goes back to the case of that we all that religion is just this aspect of human life and human nature that is to explain the unexplainable and the the hereafter and kind of the soul and these things that science up until now really has kind of fallen short on. So we could just be filling the gaps in a lot of ways of our own knowledge of reality and where we came from and what our purpose is. And the thing that concerns me the most about where we are as a living organism, as one cohesive organism floating in space, is that the life of humanity and the life of the environment and all the living creatures within it should come before everything else, including religion and commodification of the resources and the humans. And what we have is money at the top of the pyramid, and then below that we have our ideologies, and then somewhere around the bottom is human life.
Is humanity.
Yeah.
And well, you're so right, and this is why I was stressing that I'd like to talk about that framework for future of humanity going forward, because ahimsa, which is of course it's non-violence, but not just non-violence towards each other, it's towards animals as well, and all sort of living beings. So ahimsa and the in Sanatana Dharma, the essence is also your relationship to nature. So environment conservation is a big deal, and in India it's been around for so many years, but our relationship to our environment is very, very important. And today it kind of leads the way in many ways, with banning a lot of plastic and solar panels and kind of the greenery that exists. It's very green country. We're very lucky, and it's an agrarian country. That's why we have our sacred cow, because cows were the livelihood. There were so many farmers that gave us food and milk and so on. That's why it's predominantly vegetarian, and we certainly don't eat beef. And beef's slaughter is banned in India. These are all good qualities that the whole world can take a leaf off. But instead you get the so-called social justice people. Instead of talking about those things, they want to go on about caste system and blah blah blah, and just bringing down the whole thing, and really they're not even looking at the whole thing in the right way. They got it upside down. So this is what I'm seeing. It's very obvious to me, and so on. But you're right. I think humanity and respect to each other, to relationship with our environment, and also how we treat our animals and nature should be at the top of our priorities, and interconnectedness. And then I think that freedom, the mutual respect for faiths is important. And at the very end is prosperity and social programs and money and all that good stuff.
And unless there's some sort of paradigm shift, I don't see that happening anytime soon, as the dollar still remains the king of the world. And
you're right. I do see a paradigm shift. I actually see, when I see the West looking east a lot spiritually. I see a lot of people looking, people want to find themselves, people from all faiths, Christians or whatever others, Jewish people, they think, no, this is not it. There's another truth out there. They look at India and they come to India. They try to find themselves. Some actually do find themselves. Some don't.
Like
but
the Beatles.
I think when you read, yeah, I think when you immerse yourself in this Indic thought, Hinduism is one part of it, and yoga is one part, but it has many tenets, right? I think people who immerse themselves in that, they're finding a new reality, and that includes this ahimsa and respect and karma and all these beautiful things. So I think the paradigm shift is happening there by people who are looking maybe east, or it doesn't have to be India, it could be other wisdom sources that are out there that are teaching some ancient wisdoms and good things, and people are touched by that and they are incorporating that, and I see that happening on a global level. I almost feel like I think the world is becoming kind of very dharmic. It's going in that way without even, It's funny that all these, you know, the monotheistic religions are big on conversions and preaching, but I feel like the world is actually moving more Indic and dharmic without anybody ever preaching to them because they're just kind of finding a different way of thinking and living that they find very appealing and that's very gentle and truthful.
Hmm.
And they like it and
Hmm.
they're kind of adopting it and it's better. I see a big shift in the world, in some
Voluntarily.
way. So
Yeah. There hasn't been any crusades in
yes,
a little while.
beautiful. And I think that uh, it's a good thing. And there are people like myself who are maybe, I'm here, I see myself as a Dharma ambassador,
Hmm.
and not even religious, but just someone who's here, ambassador for peace and truth and wisdom. And I have access. I'm very lucky. Feel very privileged to be kind of born into a very spiritual family with good upbringing, and they taught me these great principles. And my lineage of my ancestors is deeply, I mean, is so ingrained in this wonderful ancient wisdom, and it's part of my blood, it's part of my DNA. I am a kind of a living embodiment of this Shakti energy out there in the world. I think part of my dharma is to be this manifestation of this dharmic knowledge in the world, and to be someone who maybe spreads this knowledge in a very kind of loving, peaceful way. I see. Yeah.
Well, we have had an excellent conversation. We've
Yes.
reached the longest episode.
3 hours,
Yeah,
right? Is it 3 hours? Oh my
it's
God.
actually been 3 hours, and I've got so many questions I didn't even get to ask. But I'd like to just kind of close this out with a couple more here, just to kind of give us a good conclusion here.
Yes.
Um, and one of those questions would be, do you have any, or what do you wish you would have known when you first started out in your journey of life? Just a brief kind of little bit of tips or things you've learned along the way, something you might have wished you would have known when you first started on your journey.
I think the most important lesson that I've learned, and the greatest advice I can give to anyone, is be your authentic self. Because be yourself, because everyone else is taken.
Hmm.
I think people will love and respect you for you. They want you. They don't want you to be someone else. And I think we live in a world where everyone's trying to be someone else, and also goes down to culture too. Just be proud of who you are, and but be authentic. Come from intention, come from purpose, do the right thing. I think your why should always be bigger than your what or how. That's
Okay.
so important. Think about, make sure your intention affects more people than just yourself. Set out to do something for the world. My whole message is about dharma, which is your purpose in life. Take the time to find out your true purpose and then fulfill it, because the whole world will conspire to make it happen. You just need to believe in yourself and believe in your gifts, and sort of just believe that it'll all work out, because it will. So I wish someone had told me to be as authentic as yourself and just believe in yourself and go for it. I ended up doing those two things naturally, but it wasn't something I was taught from the very get-go. And it might have, even in my own journey, I think I would have kind of, things would have been faster if someone had told me that up front. So that's sort of my message that I would like to give to anybody listening.
And yeah, I can definitely gel with that message there. And as far as any book recommendations, do you have a recommendation you'd like to give to the listeners?
My favorite book is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Paulo Coelho. It's a very simple book. It's a classic book. I love that book. It's about a boy who dared to follow his personal journey. And that's where the saying comes from, that when you uh, commit to your personal destination, the whole entire universe, cosmos, will conspire to make it happen, which is so true. Your world becomes magical because everything just kind of corrects itself so that you get what you want, because what you want is affecting the world at large. So I think that's I would recommend that book. They are amazing speakers and thinkers. I would recommend people, don't just go for the new writers and so on, I think find some of the ancient wisdoms, find, whether it's Hindu, Buddhist, Taoist, uh, there are some incredible authors out there. Uh, Try to find those, they go to the source, go to something that's ancient.
Hmm.
If you get a chance, I would say read the Vedas because they have uh, so much knowledge in them. But there's, the autobiography of a yogi is an amazing book. Deepak Chopra has great books. Sri Aurobindo is very good. Swami Vivekananda is very good. But Joseph Campbell is great as well. You have great Western, you know, uh, speakers too, and thinkers as well, Osho and so on. So, but look around, try to find some, and Greek mythology I just love. So there's always truths to be found there.
Very good. And as far as any links that you would like to just promote or anything, I have a list here of some social media platforms. If you like, I'm just going to go ahead and post those up into the show notes for anyone who would like to learn more about anything that Pretty's up to. And is there anything that you'd like to just kind of throw out right here that for me to put in the show notes?
Yes. Thank you so much for posting the link. So guys, please connect. I love connecting with people. I am very engaging. I always respond to everyone's questions. You can find me on Facebook. I have my public profile page. Twitter is Preity Upala. Instagram is Preity U. I have my own YouTube channel. I have a ton of videos there. It's Preity Upala as well. My website preetyupala.com is it's going to be live soon. Please email me. It's missb.productions@gmail.com. But please reach out. And I just want to thank everyone for this amazing opportunity to share things that are valuable to me, things that I care about. And I think things are very poignant for the world at large today, for the global narratives that we're having. And these are important conversations. And I'm about the truth and facts. And I just continue to, be love and light. And I want to keep researching and sharing this wisdom with all of you. So reach out to me. And I look forward to coming back again on this amazing platform. So I want to thank you for having me, giving me this great opportunity to sort of talk about things that are relevant. And I hope to see all of you very soon.
You're very welcome. The pleasure has been all mine. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think that if we could all just have that kind of seeking truth and wanting to have a accurate worldview of things, despite our tribalism and our divisive human natures, I think we will have a much better world to look forward to. And thank you again for coming on the show, and the show notes will be on there on the page at clintonherigstad.com/episodes/Preity Üupala. That will be available Sunday when the podcast goes live on Apple Podcasts. So thank you again for appearing on the show, and I will look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Okay, thank you everyone. Namaste. Thank you.